Chapter 273. Young man, I have high hopes for you. Continue to work hard. When young Baron Matt welcomed us, he tried his best to squeeze out a flattering smile that made me feel uncomfortable. It was as if he was a muscular gorilla trying to imitate a young girl's smile. All right then, this Baron Matt's physical characteristics were revealed. Apart from the fact that he wasn't covered in black fur, he was nothing more than a muscular gorilla that stood upright. We followed the Imperial Envoy's arrangements perfectly. We only stayed at Baron Matt's residence for one night, but that was more than enough time for us to do many things, such as accepting bribes, and extorting people. There wasn't much time left. Young Baron Matt was quite tactful and directly got to the point. The Bardi National Bank's token money was already in front of us. Due to the Bardi Empire's strong centralization of power, the Bardi Empire's gold coins had gradually been replaced by the more convenient fiduciary paper money. This small gift was 2 stacks of the highest denomination paper money in the Bardi Empire, which was equivalent to at least 50 to 60,000 gold coins, which was more than enough to buy a medium-sized manor. You're insulting my professional ethic. Although I said this, my tone was abnormally calm and I looked elsewhere. It was obvious that I didn't look him in the eye. My meaning was quite obvious. How is this enough? Are you trying to get rid of a beggar? Baron Matt grit his teeth. He recalled that although he already had a count's territory, due to the Bardi Parliament's obstruction, it had already been 3 years since the last application to increase his count's rank. If it wasn't for the assistance of a major figure in the Bardi Empire, he would probably remain a baron for the rest of his life. If something happened, he wouldn't even be able to keep his territory and his descendants' inheritance. Matt, who had once been an adventurer, could be said to have started from scratch. As a half-step legend, he was a famous warrior within 100 kilometers of the Bardi Empire. He and his companions had built up a considerable amount of wealth during their adventuring career, and as a pioneer knight, they had built up a territory from scratch. This could be considered a classic example of a salted fish turning over a new leaf and becoming famous. Unfortunately, the noble's tradition of valuing bloodline and family was deeply ingrained. Matt had never been able to remove the title of Bumpkin Baron from him. The Baron title that he bought didn't even have the right to inherit. His overly rich and vast territory was also coveted by the surrounding domain lords. All sorts of trouble had never stopped. Not having a title that matched his territory had always been his greatest weakness in the noble system. After Orlos completed his reform of the noble laws, all promotions for baron and above had to be approved by the capital's noble senate. Matt didn't have any military achievements to begin with, nor did he have any background. It would be impossible for him to be approved for a count title. Matt had experienced the cruelty of war, and he didn't want to risk his life for the sake of his hard-earned and comfortable life. So, he could only slowly live out his days as a baron. He had also consulted with scholars who knew about noble heraldry and knew that his only hope was to seek refuge with a noble who could have a say in the capital. But if those great nobles were to take a liking to him, he probably wouldn't be ridiculed as a bumpkin. Matt was quite satisfied with being a noble. After all, he had outstanding personal strength and the heavy hammer he wielded. The nearby domain lords wouldn't dare to do anything to him. However, his son was getting older and older. If he couldn't get the right to inherit the title before he came of age, then this territory would be taken back by the Bardi Empire after he died. How could Matt, who had worked so hard to reach this point, be willing to give up? Today, Baron Matt encountered a once-in-a-lifetime piece of good luck. The arrival of Rex, the Imperial envoy, and Carolyn, the eldest daughter of Duke Matt, caused Baron Matt's burning ambition to become Earl Matt reignite in his heart. He had already heard that high-level undead were even more useful in front of Emperor Roland than archdukes. As long as this Lich helped him say a few words, this matter that seemed like a small matter to major nobles would instantly be resolved. Matt was used to being stingy, so he felt pained when he saw that the Imperial envoy Rex actually felt that his gift wasn't enough. After all, this meant that he would have to pay a large amount of money. But even more than that, he was delighted. At the very least, Rex was willing to accept his gift. Why am I so cheap? Why am I so happy that someone is willing to accept my money? Of course, Matt definitely wouldn't show his annoyance and regret. He would rather bury this delight deep within his heart. In order to prevent himself from being viciously ripped off, Matt's expression was pained and annoyed. In fact, he even had an expression of hesitation and regret. However, I laughed. As expected of a muscle-bound cannon fodder. He didn't even know how to act. If he was truly pained or hesitant, why didn't he just leave? The muscles on his face were about to twitch. His fake anger was as fake as it could be. However, I didn't intend to expose him. Otherwise, how could I possibly obtain what I truly wanted? Sincerity is the most important thing. I thoughtfully glanced at the silver myth-ranked war hammer at Matt's waist and smiled meaningfully. This time, there was no need to pretend anymore. Matt truly had a bitter expression. Epic weapon. Undying killer, attack power. 30/30 is special effect 1, undead butcher. All undead that are hit by this attack have a certain chance of being instantly destroyed. Special effect 2, divine protection. Summon a golden holy domain that will resist the invasion of evil. Duration of 30 seconds. All who forcefully invade will receive 5 holy light damage per second. Special effect 3, special effect 4. Since the user isn't a warrior of the gods, they cannot be activated. There's a line of silver, twisted words on the hammer's handle. This war hammer once belonged to a true holy knight. Only a true holy knight will be able to utilize the full power of this war hammer. System notification. Instead of being a sword saint, do you really want to be a hammer saint? Comrade Luo Dachui. I actually saw Grave Robber's Notebook and 18 Ways to Use the Luoyang Shovel on the bookshelf. I instantly understood how this powerful commoner-born individual had obtained such a holy war hammer. At that moment, I even hesitated whether or not I should give this loyal fan of mine an autograph. The moment I saw the name of this war hammer, I made up my mind to get my hands on it. My name is Undying Killer, and this war hammer is called Undying Killer? This is so unlucky. I can sense the evil intentions of the world. Yep, after I obtain it, I'm going to give it to Heloise to eat. These abilities are perfect for her. As for whether or not Heloise, who used to have an undead body, would have a stomach ache from eating it, that was something I didn't even consider from the very start. At the very least, that holy sword, Pale Justice, contained the power of holy light, which made the past Heloise unable to eat it. This would be a perfect opportunity to see if she had become stronger after her evolution. I was still hoping that she would be able to continuously evolve and surpass a true god equipment. But then I suddenly thought about how it seemed rather strange to use a lowly to chop people up. But then I remembered that she was a 10,000-year-old fake girl, so I instantly calmed down. Tremble, mortal, the pink rabbit jam has gained a new ability. Undead, your end is nigh. Death isn't shameful. Dying in front of this god equipment is true humiliation. Yep, tie 2 butterfly knots on the top of this club, draw a smiley face, and put a plush pink rabbit toy on it. I couldn't help but laugh out loud as I thought about how embarrassed and unwilling my enemies would be when they were beaten to death by this club. The Lich's high-pitched soul voice echoed in the room, causing Matt to instinctively shiver. However, Heloise was the first to become dissatisfied. If you dare to do such a thing, I'll dare to cancel my transformation while you're fighting against a strong enemy. At most, I'll go on camera completely naked and have your reputation as a demon beast king spread throughout the entire mortal plane. Alright then, thinking about how the mace I swung out suddenly transformed into a naked young girl, it felt rather awkward. It would seem that the silly cat still needed to be taught a lesson. I temporarily gave up on this idea. Right now, the first thing I needed to do was to extort this extraordinary war hammer from her. It seemed quite difficult to make a warrior hand over his personal weapon, not to mention that he was a top-level warrior who was half a step away from legend rank. But the current Matt was no longer the warrior from 5 years ago. His peaceful and prosperous daily life had worn away his fighting spirit. His only hope was to obtain his own territory and noble title. And, as expected, you came here for this? I was wondering why an imperial envoy and a duke's daughter would come to such a remote territory like mine. It seems that I'll have to hand it over in order to protect my territory. In fact, Matt had long since realized that more than half of his reputation as an undead killer was due to this hammer. While his reputation was rising, when the undead became one of the main forces in this country, he would naturally attract a lot of inexplicable hostility and bring trouble upon himself. This would be the same as wearing a Dragonslayer's set of equipment and dragon skin armor in front of a dragon. It would definitely be the same as using your face to attract the attention of the undead. It would be strange if you didn't die. As expected, I can't avoid it? Perhaps it's a good thing to hand it over now. At the very least, I've made my attitude clear. Matt reluctantly glanced at the high-quality war hammer at his waist and carefully placed it on the ground. Of course, a lich wouldn't dare to touch this holy war hammer. Meanwhile, the female knight behind the lich immediately picked up this heavy war hammer. She couldn't help but fondle the war hammer lovingly. The moment that war hammer touched her, it began to glow silver and give off a mysterious aura of fighting spirit. Perhaps she felt that her old master had made her lonely for far too long, and she was looking forward to the day when she could return to the battlefield. A holy knight? No, how could a knight who believes in the holy light possibly be together with a lich? She should be a holy samurai of some god. Matt soon forgot about his doubts. The most important thing was whether or not the lich would be satisfied with his sincerity, and whether or not he would be able to obtain the title of nobility. In a sense, this was also the tragedy of a hero in his twilight years. To be able to start from scratch, he might have been fearless when he was young, but when he truly had a warm family and enough wealth, he lost the courage to fight and fight. If he was still an adventurer, and a noble dared to steal his war hammer and the wealth in his pouch, he would have long since used the Tempest hammer. As for those evil nobles who took bribes and bullied commoners, he would kill them one by one. If he occasionally met someone with a powerful background, he could also beat them up and run away. This was the case for the legend-ranked lich before him. If Matt had been in his prime, he would have dared to summon his comrades to help him slay the lich. But unfortunately, he now had to suck up to the lich and bribe him. Sometimes life was so ironic. But now that he was in his prime, not only did he become a member of the nobility, he even voluntarily gave away his treasures. All he wanted was for the title of nobility, which he had looked down on in the past, to increase his status so that his wife and son could benefit from it. Matt shook his head and tossed all these unnecessary thoughts to the back of his mind. There was nothing he could do if he missed this opportunity. The hot-blooded hero of the past did his best to recall how corrupt officials and evil merchants who he despised had tried to please others. He then did his best to smile and bend his knees even though he hadn't been hit by an arrow. As for me, I only smiled and couldn't be bothered with all this. I simply indicated for Yawn to put away her war hammer. It's good that you understand. If you also die, I'm willing to recommend you to become one of us. Right, you should know that Lady Carolyn is especially fond of adventure stories. She's especially fond of adventurers' notebooks and hand-drawn maps. These are treasures that she's always been looking for. If you have these, it won't be difficult for her to speak up for you. Adventurers' diaries were records of one's past adventures, as well as a symbol of one's past glory. But since I'd already given away the weapon that was my lifeblood, these mementos of my past glory wouldn't even count for much. Soon, I returned with a cart full of handwritten notes and geographical information. Actually, these information, especially the hand-drawn maps from veteran adventurers, were my true goal. That war hammer of mine was only something I casually smashed down on the ground. Of course, if a real Lich had been here, his first thought upon seeing this war hammer would probably have been to directly kill Matt. Dispersing the members of Carolyn's entourage far too quickly would delay us from revealing ourselves, but it would also cause us to lose a guide. Of course, it wouldn't be much of a problem if we just followed the predetermined path, but it would be far from enough to satisfy my goal. Nobody would be willing to only use the underground tunnels to escape. Being a competent young miss, it would be a miracle if Carolyn had any knowledge of the geography of the country or had a map with her at all times. However, in this era, maps and city coordinates were actually classified military secrets. Even drawing and studying maps required specialized talents, something that was extremely difficult to obtain among the commoners. However, I knew that there was a certain special job class that would try their best to obtain the most comprehensive map possible. In fact, they would even have secret paths and paths that weren't on the official map. They would even mark out the threat level of each location and things to take note of, making it easy to use. Yep, I didn't even need to guess. Of course, they were professional adventurers who didn't have a fixed residence. In terms of mobility, there were probably very few job classes that could compare to them. Not only would they not bring a map, a compass, or any information support, but they wouldn't even bring enough food and water to go on an adventure. That wouldn't be an adventure, it would be suicide. A veteran adventurer's personal adventure journal and map would be far more detailed than any official information source. I wanted to obtain a copy at all costs in order to help me escape if I was hunted down in the future. By the way, since every adventurer's personal adventure journal was vastly different, their adventurer's journal would focus on completely different things. For example, a certain dragon's journal was basically filled with travel notes about wine, food, as well as maps of each location's harvest. It would definitely be a treasure that any drunkard would desire. Due to certain special reasons, my personal travel journal was basically an account that intentionally minimized emotional elements. Although there was a tremendous amount of information, it was boring and tasteless. Just reading it would make me want to sleep. A gnome adventurer's journal could be used as a guide for local merchants, while a beastman adventurer's journal was filled with fighting and killing. As for Adam, how could a musclehead like him possibly have the brains to write a journal? Although the mat in front of me was also a musclehead, it seemed that his wife, who was also an adventurer, was quite meticulous. Her diary was very detailed, and there were many records about legends and history, which just so happened to be what I urgently needed to add. Of course, I didn't lie to this rather old former adventurer. At the very least, I didn't give him a single promise. I simply accepted his gift. It was all his own misunderstanding. All right then, seeing how he was so understanding, I indeed casually told Carolyn that she would be able to take care of such a small matter with a single note. All that mattered was that she would be able to return to the Empire's capital. As for why I wasn't so sure, that was because based on the current situation, it was highly likely that she would elope with Lilith. After making such a huge profit, I was still sitting down and making plans for my future when the silly cat suddenly came looking for me. She had a rare serious expression on her face. "Roland, there's something that you need to take a look at. This time, they're playing quite big. It could be said that they're even more overboard than you were back in the day." There was a large empty area in Baron Matt's residence's backyard. Large amounts of grains were piled there, and in one of the storerooms, Heloise wanted to show me the grains that could be found anywhere. The golden wheat still had the frost of winter on it, and it was quite cold to the touch. However, in my eyes there was nothing different about it. "What's the matter? Is there something wrong with this? Don't you feel that there's something wrong with the grains that we've been eating recently? They have a special sweet taste." I originally thought that it was a special taste caused by the water and soil here, So I came to take a look at the situation with the grains, but I opened the storeroom and tore open the ears of the wheat. I placed the grains in front of me and slowly chewed on them, carefully tasting them. There's indeed a special sweet taste, but it's also somewhat familiar. It's just like, even though it was already on the tip of my tongue, I couldn't remember what it was. Casolin's tears? Yep, that's the taste. Wait a moment, Casolin's tears. That's the best way to touch upon undead magic. Heloise transformed into her human form and twisted the golden grains in her hand, transforming them into a fine powder. She then used a series of equipment to purify the powder, add some supplementary ingredients, stir, and combine them. In the end, all that was left at the bottom of the bottle was some grayish-black liquid. She handed it to me, and I drank it all in one gulp. I could feel the slightly excited power of death in my body, which was my conclusion. There's no mistaking it. This is the taste of Casolin's tears. I've replenished all the mana I used while carrying those skeletons earlier in the day. This bottle of Casolin's blessing is at least an excellent potion. This Casolin's tears is of an excellent quality. Casolin's tears were by themselves non-toxic and harmless. However, potions made from its main ingredient were the favorite of undead mages. Casolin's blessing was an excellent potion for recovering death magic. It could also gradually change the drinker's physique and increase their control over undead magic. It was basically the favorite of undead mages. Pure Casolin's tears had long since become a forbidden product of the Holy Church. Not only that, it was difficult to cultivate them. If all the food here had been contaminated by it, then it definitely wouldn't be a coincidence. I could faintly sense the existence of a massive scheme. Perhaps Casolin's tears by itself weren't poisonous, but it was one of the best ways to touch upon undead magic. Many powerful spells and forbidden spells would contain Casolin's tears. I absolutely refused to believe that the mastermind behind this scheme would use so much Casolin's tears just to improve the taste of the grains. Has all the grains here been contaminated? Damn it, is that undead mage so insane? What does he intend to do? However, Heloise shook her head. I've already asked around. These grains were all just harvested from the surrounding field. Apart from the farmers, no one else has touched them. They even just entered the warehouses yesterday. How is that possible? Wait a moment, could it be the source? I had an expression of astonishment and disbelief. If what I guessed was true, then this would be far too much of a grand scheme. Yes, I've already asked around. These grains are all high-quality seeds from the capital. The average harvest is twice as high as before, and they're all over the country now. Many people have been eating these grains for more than 10 years already. Eating Casolin's tears for more than 10 years meant that this person's affinity with undead magic had reached an incredible level. Were they intending to mass-produce undead mages? No, there was another possibility. This was a secret technique passed down among high-level undead mages. Heloise had obviously guessed at this possibility as well, but she appeared rather hesitant. After all, such a conclusion would be far too insane. You should know that undead mages who consume Casolin's tears for a long period of time are more than twice as likely to transform into high-level creatures that retain their intelligence after death. Damn it! That madman would actually do such a thing. It's said that all undead emperors are insane. I didn't believe it before, but now I do. The game's storyline only mentioned that the Bardi Empire would rapidly fall into the hands of the undead calamity. I never expected that there would be so many twists and turns. If the undead calamity was activated here, the entire Bardi Empire would become a land of the undead. Just how insane would someone be to do such a thing? Congratulations for triggering the epic side quest. Why is there a Resident Evil in another world as well? The Zombies series of achievements have been unlocked. You've exchanged for special gunpowder weapons for fighting zombies. Enjoy the fun of playing Resident Evil in a magical fantasy world. System notification. I'm really impressed. You didn't activate the main quest, but instead activated the hidden side quest. If you don't want this fantasy adventure to become a Resident Evil apocalypse, hurry up and go to the Cloud Tower to accept the main quest. Chapter 274. Looking at the system's golden words, even I had the urge to smash my head against the wall. Epic quest my ass. We're already facing a Resident Evil quest? Isn't the difficulty a little too high? This was supposed to be a fantasy world, so why was there a Resident Evil? What did unlocking firearms mean? Do you really intend to watch me learn how to use a gun and play Doomsday Escape? There was still no response to his continuous complaint. The only thing in front of him was a worsening situation. Being able to increase the amount of Casolan's tears in ordinary grains and allow them to grow naturally would be the equivalent of creating a special species. I was unable to do such a thing, but other undead emperors who controlled entire undead planes might be able to do such a thing. At this point, I could more or less guess what the undead emperors were planning with my system's notification. Casolan's blessing, which had already been refined into a potion, was something that ordinary people couldn't drink. Casolan's blessing was a tonic and mana potion for high-level undead mages. However, the human body's adaptability was astonishing. It would be fine if it was only a small amount, but if it was accumulated over time, it could even change the human body's constitution. If the entire Bardi Empire had been eating this type of grain for more than 10 years already, then it was likely that most people in the Bardi Empire would have an astonishing amount of Casolan's tears in their bodies, which would make them astonishingly resistant to undead magic. And if an undead plague or undead calamity arrived, it would likely be the end of everyone playing Plants vs. Zombies. Not only will the undead calamity's transformation and spread greatly increase, I'm afraid that a large number of high-level undead will also appear. I think that Toilet Bowl Baron can at least be turned into a Death Knight Lord. The undead scourge never lacks cannon fodder. They're only short of the middle-level backbone and the highest combat power. It's Matt, not the toilet. Fine, I know that now isn't the time to comment on this. If it were me, since the government has already given me so much support, spending 20 years to train a group of necromancers wouldn't be a problem at all. When the time comes, the undead army will still have a large number of mid-level officers and liches as backup. But now, even if the conspiracy is right in front of us, what should we do? The moment I asked, Heloise, who was speaking smoothly just now, was instantly speechless. Yes, what should I do? Just because the undead emperors discovered the problem didn't mean that they were capable of solving the problem. The undead emperors had prepared for decades, but we had entered the game far too late. It was just like a game of chess that had already reached its end. The undead emperors had already grasped the overall situation, and it was impossible for us to reverse the situation. Find the remaining undead army and fight to my heart's content? First of all, the enemy was a high-level noble that the Bardi Empire recognized. Attacking a noble from another empire would be no different from declaring war. Even if I didn't care about all these random side effects, I still wouldn't be able to defeat them. Out of the 13 undead emperors, I would need to use a god's descent just to deal with 2 of them. If the undead emperors were the most senior ones, perhaps even a god's descent wouldn't be enough to deal with them. Fortunately, for some reason, I didn't sense any signs that an undead emperor was descending. If an existence of this level completely descended, there would definitely be obvious signs. The true gods would definitely send down divine prophecies. Since everything was still calm, it seemed that the undead emperor's dimensional descent plan had met with unexpected obstacles. While everyone else was only thinking about how to defend against the undead emperor's invasion, my considerations were far more complex. After all, I had once been one of the undead emperors, so I knew quite a bit about them. It was quite normal for others to view the semi-god undead as demons that would destroy everything. However, I knew that the undead emperors had their own thoughts and goals. They definitely weren't brainless villains who would destroy for the sake of destroying. It's absolutely impossible to transform the mortal plane into a plane of the undead. That would be the equivalent of destroying the cycle of reincarnation and simultaneously declaring war against the Order main gods and Chaos main god. Not only that, the undead plane's living environment is actually more suitable for the undead. But if they intend to participate in this war, they'll need to choose one side to participate in it. No, at least temporarily ally with the undead. The undead definitely don't get along with the Holy Light, but they also have a terrible relationship with the Chaos demons. It doesn't seem possible for either side to cooperate. Could there be a third party? Or perhaps they intend to act alone. But why are they investing so much? Many thoughts flashed through my mind. Just what was the undead emperor's goal? If I didn't know this, it would likely be impossible for me to come up with a suitable strategy. Ask the Holy Church for help? Now that they had already declared war, even if we tossed all this evidence in front of them, it would only make things worse. Sneak into the Bardi Empire's capital city? Let's not even mention the fact that we couldn't do anything else right now. As long as the Bardi Empire wasn't an idiot, the Bardi Empire's combat strength would definitely be insanely high. Even a true god's clone would likely be unable to return. It would seem that we'll have to use that W plan. What? You're actually going to use that plan that has no conscience at all? You need to think more about the consequences. Aren't you afraid of endless trouble in the future? I've already thought it through. No matter what the consequences are, at least it's better than the current situation. Right? Help me think about how I should write my report. Okay. First tell me what W plan is, and I'll immediately write it for you. Just what kind of plan is it? You actually need to write a report? Who do you intend to write a report for? Looking at the silly cat's expression as she tried not to laugh, I knew that I had been made fun of again. You don't even know what W plan is, and you're saying that this plan has no conscience and will cause endless trouble in the future? Are you kidding me? I'm just kidding. First of all, you've never told me anything about this so-called plan, but every time you come up with some grand strategy, you're always insane and will cause endless trouble in the future. Even if I don't know the specifics, I know that you're definitely not a normal person. Alright, I was instantly stumped by this question. It seemed that there was no room for me to refute it. Describing this plan as lacking conscience, insane, and endless trouble in the future wasn't wrong at all. The core idea was, since the other party has already flipped the table and started messing around, since we can't play by the rules anymore, we might as well just blow up the room. I thought that the silly cat had peeked at my plan from somewhere, but it seemed that I hadn't even thought of this plan for a few days, so it was impossible for it to be leaked. Since that was the case, I might as well explain it a little. After I finished explaining the plan, just as I expected, the blonde young girl revealed a face full of shock and disbelief. Her eyes seemed to be roaring, "Just what is your brain made of?" She didn't even realize that saliva had already flowed to the side of her mouth. She was basically no different from a spoiled young girl. However, as expected of a 10,000-year-old fake young girl whose accessories could be sold as antiques, she soon recovered from her shock, and after thinking about it, she began discussing the details with me using her abundant knowledge. If you eat everything by yourself like this report won't be approved. We need to make some changes to give our partners a chance to profit and maximize the profit. This way, even if we don't take the initiative to do it, the other party will do it themselves. After all, you only want the final result. In that case, it might be a good thing to slightly lose control of the plan. If you want to eat everything by yourself, be careful that you don't get killed by the higher-up. The older, the wiser. As expected of an existence whose age couldn't be verified. With her help, the success rate of this plan increased by at least 30%. Since I had already thought it through, I began writing the report on the spot. By the time I submitted the report, it was already dawn. Who did I give the report to? Dragon Autien's mass production plan? One day later, even Ale himself paused in surprise for several minutes as he read through the thick letter that Womians sent over. Due to my relationship with Womians, as long as I purposefully thought about something, I would be able to transmit my thoughts to Womians. Womians would then use logic to determine the feasibility and effectiveness of this plan. After discovering that it was indeed beneficial to himself and the law, he would naturally adopt it. And now that this plan was in Ale's hands, it meant that it was impossible for Womians alone to handle this plan, so he needed to find reinforcements. How insane, but it does seem feasible. Elliot, send a letter to Patricia, Catilo, and Benny. Just tell them that our little brother has a good idea. We're going to have some fun. Perhaps they'll even have a chance to become main gods. After hesitating for a moment, Ale stopped his subordinates. Forget it, let's call them over to discuss this. Irene, increase the vigilance level of the Death God's divine kingdom. Make sure to keep this a secret. Otherwise, it'll be fun if the Order faction starts a civil war. Little Roland, you're throwing a huge amount of trouble at me. Ha, it would seem that I won't be bored for the time being. Of course, I didn't know that this proposal would give some true gods quite a headache, nor did I know that the Bardi Empire's continuous meetings would test the true god's wisdom and experience. And right now we were still faced with the Bardi Empire's dire situation. Large amounts of food had been mixed with Casolin's tears. If any undead magic was triggered, the consequences would be unimaginable. But what does that have to do with me? I'm no savior of the world. Just leave saving the world to the Holy Church. Besides, the situation is already in such a terrible state that I can't do anything even if I want to. Even I, who was a Chinibu, knew that there were things that could be done and things that couldn't be done. This was a scheme that the undead emperors had set up for many years. Directly jumping in like this would be the equivalent of fighting the undead emperors head-on, which would be no different from suicide. Not to mention, I lacked the ability to deal with the details. The Bardi Empire had been eating these crops for more than 10 years already. If I said that there was a problem with these crops, even if I confirmed it, the first thing I would receive wouldn't be a solution to the problem. Instead, it would cause widespread panic and the Bardi Empire's plan to be activated in advance. Of course, there would also be a large-scale food shortage. It was likely that the Bardi Empire would have long since abandoned the original crop. Massacre the entire city? Not to mention, the undead calamity hadn't even arrived yet. Even if the undead calamity arrived, the entire country would already be in such a state. Where would I start massacring them? After massacring them, it would be convenient for the undead calamity to summon more undead. I would even take the blame for the undead calamity. So, since the problem was already so big that it was impossible to deal with it, it was actually easier to deal with it. At any rate, I didn't care anymore. I would just do what I needed to do. This huge scheme had already been tossed into the heavens along with my report. Let the undead emperors worry about it. Yep, I had successfully extravagantly shifted the blame to the Bardi Empire. I was definitely not going to do this anymore. If I really had to change anything, I would say that from today onwards my group would no longer be eating the local crop. Of course, Heloise and I were exceptions. This was perfect for replenishing our energy. Since I had already discovered all this, I unhesitatingly said goodbye the moment the sky brightened. The situation had already deteriorated to such a degree. The undead had probably already taken control of this country decades ago. There was no meaning in continuing to wander around the Bardi Empire. On the way back, I used Carolyn and the others' blood to conduct a small experiment. However, I unexpectedly discovered something unexpected. The citizens of the Bardi Empire had at least 3 times the amount of Casolin's tears in their bodies compared to the locals. It would seem that the citizens of the Bardi Empire had started eating these crops much earlier, which was why they were poisoned even deeper. However, there was nothing we could do about it. All we could do was follow our original plan and continue walking down the streets, extorting and extorting as we filled up our own wallets while heading towards Port Victoria, but that was basically impossible. Matt, not every noble was someone who wanted something from the Bardi Empire. Most local nobles were the local rulers of their region. It was only natural for them to be hostile and on guard against the central government. And the more remote a region was, the more they would maintain their faith in the Holy Light. It was also only natural for them to be hostile towards the undead. Since we were representing the Bardi Empire, we were quite considerate on the surface. However, after our warm treatment, there was a certain estrangement. Every time we went out, we would be glared at with hostility. I felt quite complex emotions being treated like this. From a certain standpoint, this was a good thing, as it meant that the Bardi Empire wasn't completely united. At the very least, remote regions still had their own way of thinking. However, I still felt quite displeased that others were always so on guard against me. When we arrived at the crossroads leading to Port Victoria, we finally heaved a sigh of relief. This was the Bardi Empire's new territory, so they didn't have much control over it. Even if something really did happen, we would have a high chance of escaping alive. However, right after we entered the Bardi Empire's manor, we heard two headlines. The first was that Pope Bardi had officially declared a holy war. He requested that all countries of faith send reinforcements within 2 months and form a crusade against the Bardi Empire. For Pope Bardi to make such a decision, it might have something to do with the information we sent out. As for the second headline, there was probably no need to gather any information at all. It was enough to see it with one's own eyes. The dazzling volcano erupting under the white clouds in the distance was the best evidence. I could still feel the earth trembling and the earth and fire elemental energy going berserk even from thousands of kilometers away. A forbidden spell. And it's an earth and fire elemental dual forbidden spell. The news was quite simple, but the content was quite thought-provoking. The mage country had responded to Pope Bardi's summons and officially declared war against the Bardi Empire. Their first wave of attack was a forbidden spell against the Bardi Empire's Fortress of Frost. The Bardi Empire suffered a major defeat, and the defending Bardi Empire lost at least 100,000 elite soldiers. As revenge, the Bardi Empire's Super Ace Dragon Knight Squadron had already entered the battlefield. An epic battle between archmages and dragons was about to begin. A full-scale war between the two mega-empires was about to begin. H's 7 Infernos, Preface, Demon's Whispers, has ended. Times have changed. Chapter 1. The Vulture of War has been temporarily sealed due to your efforts due to the peaceful rise of the underground world. The third act, Calamity of Despair, has been activated ahead of time. System notification, what will come will come. Chapter 275. Nightrain City used to be the capital of the 17 New Moon countries, but now it was only a small city on the outskirts of the Bardi Empire. However, the one in charge of this city was the Bardi Empire's Dragon Knight Archduke, Halent Winston. Many mega-empires had their own trump-card armies that had been passed down for countless years. The Bardi Empire's most famous army was its Dragon Knight army. Dragons would forever stand at the top of the food chain, and they were one of the few gold bloodline species in the world. Even the weakest of them would be equivalent to a human gold rank. As long as they learned some hunting techniques and magic, even ordinary legend rank warriors would be helpless against these flying beasts. After all, dragons could fly, while ordinary warriors could only get beaten up on the ground. The Dragon Knight contract was usually a contract between a powerful warrior and a dragon's, and basically only the strong would be recognized by the dragons. However, the result was an obvious paradox. The weak who needed the dragon's power would never be recognized by the dragons, while the strong who were recognized by the dragons didn't need the dragon's power. In that case, the Dragon Knight naturally became a legend. That was why, even if there were one or two weak individuals who coincidentally obtained the Dragon Knight's recognition, it wouldn't become the norm. And as humanity's combat strength decreased, the Dragon Knight, which was the ultimate form of aerial combat, became fewer and fewer. It was already quite rare for a powerful country to have one or two Dragon Knights, and most of them were young dragons that were hired at great expense. Their combat strength and willpower were all questionable. However, there was one country that had always been an exception. The Bardi Empire had never had less than 50 Dragon Knight. Even the weakest Dragon Knight was at the gold rank. It was incomprehensible how the Bardi Empire was able to obtain the dragon's recognition so easily. Some people said that the Bardi Empire obtained the dragon god's secret treasure, while others said that they had a long-standing alliance with the dragons. But no matter what, due to the large number of Dragon Knights, the skies would never belong to the Bardi Empire's enemies. One of the reasons why the Ottoman Empire developed aerial battleships was because it treated those damned Dragon Knights as imaginary enemies. Halent Winston was the vice-commander of the Dragon Knight army. The commander was a member of the royal family, and the current leader was Emperor Orlos. He was one of the top 10 most powerful generals in the country, and he was ranked 67th on the famous generals' rankings, the Dragon Knight Archduke. The current Bardi Empire had a total of 72 Dragon Knight members. 60 of them were divided into 12 small squadrons. Roland himself commanded 5 squadrons of 25 Dragon Knight members. Even without mentioning his identity and status, his personal strength was astonishing. The dragons he was riding on were the adult blue dragon Cloud Storm Sishusler, who was quite famous among the dragons. He himself had become a legendary warrior 10 years ago, wielding the legendary Thunder Horn. He had once killed 100 Griffin Knights single-handedly on the battlefield. He was also a famous general. 1 year ago, he silently left the Bardi Empire's capital and brought all of his subordinates' combat strength to this city. At the time, this had caused quite a commotion. As the former capital of the Bardi Empire, Nightrain City was a classic example of a fortress city. But ever since Archduke Halent moved here, not only did he bring a large number of troops with him, he also invested a large amount of funds and resources into protecting the city. Numerous cannon towers and defensive towers were built, and the city walls were reinforced over and over again. Originally, everyone found this quite strange. After all, fortresses often required imaginary enemies. Nightrain City didn't have any neighboring countries, so Halent's actions seemed completely unnecessary. But after the Victoria Port incident occurred, Nightrain City became the only way to reach Port Victoria. Only then did everyone learn what Archduke Halent was guarding against: the undead. While the Bardi nobles were astonished by Archduke Halent's choice, in less than a year's time, there were almost no bandits in the area. Due to the constant appearance of dragons in the sky, Nightrain City gained a new name: Rain Dragon City. When we first entered the city, a sudden downpour covered everything, making it easier for us to enter. Since Archduke Halent was also a guest from the Bardi Empire's capital, Lilith and Carolyn's identities were switched again in order to avoid bumping into him. Since Lilith was the eldest daughter of the Bardi Empire's main faction, her documents were even more authentic than the real deal. But if possible, I still didn't want to meet this famous Dragon Knight Archduke Halent in person. That was why my plan was to enter the city as inconspicuously as possible and first gather information before considering whether or not to meet with Archduke Halent. To be honest, if it wasn't necessary, I didn't even intend to pass through this city. Carolyn, how's your relationship with Archduke Halent? Have you met him before? He's a little scary. Carolyn, who had been clinging to her maid for quite a while, finally answered me. Her voice was filled with a mysterious tremble and unease, as if she had recalled something frightening. From her scattered words, I roughly understood Bardi noble's impression of Halent. He never participated in any noble banquets or social event. If he had to attend any formal gatherings, he would always appear in his military uniform. He even had the guts to carry a sword in front of Emperor Halent. Although he had offended many people, he had also gained the recognition of many military commanders and commoners. He was a representative of the Bardi Empire's true power and hawks. As for why Carolyn was so scared, it was because her father, who was also a duke, had once invited Halent, who hadn't inherited the title of Archduke yet, to be his swordsmanship teacher to his two children. This was doubtlessly a method for nobles to rope in and get close to each other. However, Halent obviously took it seriously and forcefully trained Carolyn and her younger brother strictly according to military standards. The two siblings, who had been spoiled since childhood, were bullied to the point of death. Even after Carolyn's father personally begged for mercy, Halent still persisted in his opinion. Let them go. Since they're now my subordinates, I can't allow them to continue being unqualified soldiers, even if Emperor Halent begs for mercy. The two of you only have two choices. Complete your training, or die. When Halent's soft voice echoed in the courtyard, for some reason, nobody dared to look directly at the general. That formless might was just like a dragon patrolling its own territory. There's no mistaking it. Dragon's might. I came to a simple conclusion after hearing this description. Perhaps the Bardi Empire's Dragon Knight was mysterious in the eyes of many, but after so many years, some things had long since been revealed. First of all, the Dragon Knight was basically a family inheritance. Secondly, it was easy to learn from previous battles that most of these knights weren't pure humans. What flowed in their veins was the bloodline of dragons. They were a group of dragon descendants. Unlike the magically created draconians, dragon descendants were naturally much stronger. Most of their ancestors were true dragons, and they would often inherit part of dragons' power and natural talents, making them quite difficult to deal with. The Bardi Empire's Dragon Knight was a dragon descendant. This might be a secret to ordinary people, but in the world of the strong, it wasn't much of a secret. The true secret was how to keep a dragon descendant in a human country and how to have a dragon descendant become a dragon knight. Indeed, as a dragon descendant was a mixed blood of dragons, it was quite easy for dragons to have a good impression of them. However, having a good impression of them was one thing, and having them work for them was another. Even if they were distant relatives, there was no reason for them to ride on someone else's back. And if a dragon descendant's spouse was an ordinary human, the power of their bloodline would naturally thin out. In just a few generations they would be no different from ordinary humans. Just what was going on with these dragon descendants that had been passed down for thousands of years? It was truly incomprehensible. To be honest, I was even more unwilling to meet this legend-ranked Duke Halent after hearing all this. After all, the Eye of Truth, one of the necessary natural talents of immemorial dragons, specialized in seeing through all sorts of illusions and disguises. Deception would basically be negligible in front of Little Red, but if we met a dragon descendant who inherited this natural talent, it was likely that all our secrets would be exposed. But right now, I wasn't in the mood to guess at the secrets of these dragons. After all, if anyone was struck by a 500-kilogram greatsword and sunk into the city walls, it would be impossible for them to remain relaxed. 1 minute ago, right after we opened the city gates, a figure that wasn't particularly tall appeared in front of our caravan amidst the heavy rain. Heavy rain pelted down on his waterproof hood. His naturally curly golden hair maintained its unique characteristics in the rain, and his golden vertical eyes gave off an aura that would make any living creature tremble. Archduke Halent. When Carolyn muttered Halent's name, I was still trying to think of a way to deceive him. But the next instant, that huge steel blade that was as tall as a human sliced into my body. I didn't even have the time to react before I was sent flying several dozen meters and embedded into the city wall. I've said it before, filthy undead are not allowed to enter my city. Trespassers die. Halent spoke in a soft voice, but nobody would doubt his determination to kill me. If he had only attacked the Lich, perhaps there would have been room for negotiation. However, someone was already unable to restrain himself, and his surging killing intent transformed into a physical pressure. "You dare to hit father?" Ah Dang, who had been slowly following behind the caravan, was originally napping, but now he suddenly became furious. The next instant, the already gigantic abomination instantly increased in size by more than 10 times, becoming a giant of flesh that was even taller than the city walls. This time, even Halent revealed an expression of astonishment. A strong individual's aura wouldn't lie. This giant abomination in front of him was definitely no ordinary creature. The pressure it gave him far surpassed even that of a legend-ranked Lich. Could it be that the undead were plotting something again? Halent's expression remained calm even as that gigantic foot was about to stomp down. He knew that his old companion wouldn't allow any danger to befall him. Pa. Ah Dang was knocked down by a heavy object before the foot even landed. What suddenly pounced on Ah Dang was a blue dragon that descended from the sky. Thunder and lightning circled around the blue dragon, and the berserk thunder gave off an even more frightening aura. Blue dragons on rainy nights were the favored children of storms and thunder. Right now, this was its strongest home ground. Damn it, where did this monster come from? However, this majestic blue dragon wasn't in a good situation. A piece of flesh had already been cut off from one of its lower limbs. Just one contact with the giant abomination caused it to be at a disadvantage. The giant abomination's skin had teeth that could devour corpses and bones, and a piece of flesh was bitten off the moment it came into contact with the giant abomination. Ah Dang is going to eat you! The furious Ah Dang didn't intend to hold back at all. His distorted body transformed into the scariest nightmare. The giant abomination transformed into a gigantic dragon spider that could devour dragons. With just one exchange of blows, the adult dragon abomination became tiny in front of Ah Dang and was viciously sent flying. The Dragon Knight Archduke was still as calm as ever. It was just that the horn at his waist was already at his mouth. Since the undead had already torn all pretense of cordiality, the next battle would no longer be a local battle. It would be a battle between the undead and the Dragon Knight. Ah Dang! Back down! Right now I was burning with anger. I didn't care if you were an undead, a Dragon Knight, or a Dragon Knight. Since you had already slapped me in the face, I would naturally return the favor. My berserk magic transformed into a black mist, while the power of death transformed into pitch-black shadows. These were my servants of death. Being immersed in the darkness, I seemed even more like a boss than a boss. It had been a long time since I had been hit in such a sorry state. The only thing that proved that I still maintained my rationality was that I was still maintaining my Lich form and only intended to use magic to fight. Roland, I sense that something's wrong with the situation. Calm down first. Be more rational. Heloise was warning me, but did I even need this silly cat to remind me? It was obvious that something was wrong with the current situation. We had clearly come in without permission, yet the Dragon Knight had immediately attacked us. It was quite obvious that there was something fishy going on. I'm quite rational. I'll use my rationality to kill him. The end of all things, frigid winter. A huge amount of ice magic gathered on the ancient arm, and the green soulfire turned into a pale white ice flame. It would be impolite not to return the favor. Since you attacked me as a greeting, let me use a tactical spell to return the favor. Is this your rationality? You're probably using your knees to maintain your rationality. Halent watched as the heavy rain in the sky instantly transformed into snowflakes. For the first time in his life, he wondered if he shouldn't have gone out today, or if he had found the wrong person. Chapter 276. Due to the unique geography and climate of the surrounding mountains, it was quite easy for Nightrain City, which was built right next to the mountains, to become a place where dark clouds gathered. And since the rainstorms always occurred at night, when the temperature was lower, the city received its poetic nickname of Night Rain City. In terms of military affairs, Night Rain City had a high geographical advantage, and the rainy weather was also an advantage for the fortress's defense. The slippery mountain roads made it difficult for siege weapons to be effective. Under Halent's management, the entire mountain was being artificially modified, and this fortress was expanding at a frightening speed. Based on the current construction speed, it was expected that Night Rain City would become one of the most powerful fortresses in the world within 2 years. But today, what the city guards saw wasn't the usual rainy night. Instead, it was a snowy night that had long since disappeared in spring. At first, it was only snowflakes the size of rice grains. Following that, snowflakes began to fall, and in the blink of an eye, it became a blizzard so heavy that it was difficult to even see one's own fingers. The Lich stood there, and the ground around him transformed into a field of snow. Just by releasing his own magic, he was able to change the environment. Without a doubt, he was an incredible archmage. Perhaps he had already reached the threshold of saint rank, but so what? No matter how strong he is, have we ever feared anyone? The 500-kilogram diamond greatsword was trembling slightly due to its wielder's excitement. The dragon-eyed knight sensed his opponent's threat, and he had already found the most valuable prey. With a low roar, all the muscles in his body naturally entered a state of overload, as if he was a wild beast hunting for food. Full! Halent muttered a magical rune in a low voice, causing blue and white lightning to flash around his greatsword. The dancing lightning illuminated his face, and Halent's overly handsome face, which was filled with the desire to do battle, now had a steely decisiveness to it. His thunderstorm greatsword was strengthened and enchanted by draconic magic, and every time he swung it, it would summon lightning and thunder, increasing its power by 30%. Not far away, Dark Cloud Storm, Sishusler viciously glared at Adang, who had already transformed again. He was just about to flap his wings, intending to fly up and launch a new round of attacks when he suddenly felt a light footprint on his forehead. Only then did he react. "Little guy, if you can't die, don't move." Above its head was a young human female. However, in the blue dragon's senses, it felt as if she was 1,000-kilogram boulder. The giant dragon species engraved their ranks into their bloodline. This was the first time the noble blue dragon had felt true terror. This was a superior aura that even an adult blue dragon would be unable to resist. The Dragon King of the Color Dragons? Primordial Dragon? Adult dragons, and ancient dragons, under normal circumstances, every advancement would take thousands of years. The difference in strength was huge, and this huge difference in draconic might suppress the adult blue dragon, making it unable to get up and could only bow down. No one would believe it if this was told to others. With 2 unknown individuals as opponents, the illustrious Dragon Knight Archduke and his dragon were completely suppressed in just a single exchange. Right now I was enjoying my battle against Halent. Icicle. There was no incantation. There weren't even any magical waves. I extended my bony middle finger, and it glowed with a white light. It then transformed into a gigantic icicle-shaped breath of ice that resembled a dragon's breath. The cold was already upon him, but Halent's expression didn't change at all. He unhesitatingly swung his sword downwards. His sword clashed with the icicle, and the icicle was reduced to snowflakes. The crackling thunder sword actually easily sliced apart the icicle breath. A special ability to break through magic? It seems that it's not an enchanted magic sword, but a natural talent of my species. When fighting against dragon, demon, or god's descendants, apart from needing to be on guard against their much higher basic stats than ordinary people, I also needed to be on guard against all sorts of natural talent abilities that were impossible to defend against. Snap. I snapped my fingers, and numerous icicles shot up from the ground where the charging knight was standing. I lowered my head, protected my face, and used my shoulder as a spear to attack. Boom. The sword-wielding knight didn't stop. He actually managed to shatter the icicles. However, judging from the shattered pieces of his armor and the fresh blood on his forehead, he wasn't having an easy time, either. However, Halent knew that maintaining a distance from a mage who had reached such a high level in ice magic would basically be suicidal. Only the courageous would emerge victorious in a direct confrontation. Even if he was injured, he needed to close the distance between us. You actually like to ram? Alright then, I'll let you ram to your heart's content. Come, ice wall. I clapped my hands together, and numerous ice walls appeared in the path of my charge. Large amounts of rain and snow fell down, making this place my domain and home ground. How is this possible? Doesn't this lich require a casting time or a mana vacuum period? Even though Halent's cold expression remained calm, the unfamiliar mage in front of him obviously had extraordinary spellcasting abilities, which he couldn't understand at all. But even so, he still had a chance of victory. 5 meters. A battle between a mage and a warrior would always depend on distance. Even a mage who was 2 power levels higher than a warrior would die if a warrior managed to close in on them. Ring of Ice. The more I fought, the more skilled I became. Although I was shouting the name of a normal ice magic spell, I was actually only using the most basic ice magic, ice sculpting. Elemental sculpting seemed simple, but it actually had countless wondrous uses. The simplest elemental model would be constructed, and then I would use mana to place the basic particles in place. A horizontal pull would create an ice wall, a vertical pull would create an icicle, and a circle around the opponent would create an ice ring. This was different from the past when I had to forcefully control the ice and snow. The ice and snow here were like extensions of my will and arm, so it was no different from fighting with my physical body. Smack. This time, I suddenly clenched my fist in midair, and swung it down with all my might. A formless fist of snow suddenly descended without any warning, attacking from a blind spot above Halent's head and smashing him into the ground. Oh my, it hurts just by looking at it. Only after the heavy fist landed did the smoke begin to disperse. A large crater appeared in the ground, and shattered rocks flew everywhere. Just like me, Halent didn't even get a chance to scream before he was smashed into the ground. The large hand of ice and snow also began to dissipate. Just from its appearance, this technique seemed similar to the high circle magic spell Barov's fist, but it was actually just the most basic ice sculpting technique. The only difference was that the sculpting technique was a bit larger, so the mana consumption was still negligible. If I had only been able to mechanically copy a mage's basic spell model in the past, at most someone would have taught me that 1 + 1 = 2, and I would have been able to come up with 10 + 10 = 20. But the current me had obtained formulas and calculation methods, so I could easily modify simple spell models as I pleased. If I want to condense ice and snow into a solid form, I'll need the ice element to be the tightest. Although it'll be sturdy and sharp, it'll be much slower. If I want it to be fast, I'll just need to condense thin particles. If I want it to become rays of light or mist, I'll need to calculate the reaction force. My bony hands were filled with large chunks of ice and snow, as well as merrily singing ice spirits. Under the influence of my magic, they would occasionally transform into mist, icicles, or colorless and odorless ice. Their shape, state, and size weren't a problem at all. With a single thought, I could change their forms. With a single thought, I could distort common sense, omit unnecessary processes, and omit the restrictions of common sense. This was the foundational magic I could use as I pleased. Oh my, how interesting! As if I had found my favorite toy, I wholeheartedly focused on controlling my ice and snow magic. I even forgot that I was currently fighting against the incredibly famous Dragon Knight Archduke Halent. Clang. Indeed, I seemed to have forgotten. This pained sound was the sound of my head smashing against a sturdy layer of ice. My pitiful little dragon descendant, I hope that he doesn't get a concussion. It would be terrible if he was injured too badly and left with a psychological scar. I might as well just smash myself several hundred more times and forget all about it. You little thing. It's impossible for me to dig a hole and ambush you. How many times do you think I've fought against those worms? The ground has long since frozen over. I'm just waiting to smash into the wall. From the moment that Halent summoned a lightning enchantment, I knew that he was most likely a blue dragon. And blue dragons, who were skilled at controlling lightning and thunder, loved to build their nests in deserts and barren hills. They were naturally skilled at digging holes. Their natural talents included sand movement and earth movement, so of course I would be on guard against them. The snow in this area was getting heavier and heavier. Although I hadn't created a soul world yet, all the preparations were complete. All of my mana had been converted into pure ice and snow elemental essence. They were the paint I would use to copy the Northland scenery, while the foundational magic ice sculpting was my brush. My copy of my world of ice and snow was complete. Snowflakes kept falling, and the ground was now covered in a thick layer of snow. This small piece of land transformed into a snowy mountain, and the magical crystal tree was also faintly visible in the snow. From a distance, it seemed to be nothing more than a beautiful snowy scene. However, just like the freezing Northland's winter, death traps would often be hidden in the clean snowy scenery. If one didn't understand the rules of the snowy mountain and only acted on their instincts, then a greedy traveler wouldn't be able to see the next spring. So this is my soul imprint, the Ice Walker? Oh my, it's just what I like. I apologize that I didn't get to see your true power until today. The snowflakes in the air could transform into lethal ice blades at any moment. The accumulated snow on the ground could suddenly collapse or freeze at any moment. The layer of ice under the accumulated snow was even beginning to silently form ice blades. The reflection of light from the ice and snow created an illusion of endless white snow. One wrong step would either cause me to fall into a bottomless abyss or forever sleep with the ice and snow. The ice element kept falling along with the snow. The ordinary street had transformed into a giant snowy mountain. This seemed like a tremendous amount of mana, but actually, all I needed to do was use my mana to summon ice and snow. Since the snowy scenery had already been created, all that was left was to slowly admire it. As expected, fighting against opponents of similar strength levels was an excellent way to improve myself. In the past, my opponents' power levels had been completely uneven. They were either so strong that I couldn't defeat them without using cheats, or so weak that I could defeat them with only one hand. This time, I was forced to use ice and snow magic to fight. This was a long-awaited full power battle, but it allowed my many years of accumulation and recent understandings to explode, transforming them into actual combat strength through actual combat. I could sense that deep within my soul, the Ice Walker soul imprint that had been reconstructed was now faintly glowing. It was growing stronger under the nourishment of the silver light, but it seemed to have become much smaller, only about 1/4 of its original size. Everyone only has one soul, and only one soul imprint. Do I have to reach the standard for all 4 abilities before I can enter the legend rank? I didn't need to say anything else, nor did I need to search for a reason. It was as if I had received some sort of heavenly revelation. I already knew that if I wanted to enter the legend rank, I would have to gradually summon all 4 soul imprints, and I would have to improve myself. Others only need to experience it once, but I need to experience it 4 times? And finally, I even need to try fusing with them? What kind of hellish difficulty is this? Forget about ice magic. I learned it wrongly in the past, but it's fine to change it. That counts as an improvement. However, my attainments in law, holy light, and death are almost at the peak of the world. How am I supposed to improve? Why does it feel like it's even more difficult for me to enter the legend rank than it is for others to enter the semi-god rank? Now that I knew my future path, although I kept complaining verbally, a nameless fire was burning in my heart. I wasn't a masochist who didn't take the normal path, so of course I would have complaints about the ridiculously high difficulty of entering the legend rank. However, I also knew that there was no such thing as luck on the path of cultivation. The harder it was to advance, the greater the rewards would be. Since I had to pay 4 times the price, even if I didn't pay 10 times the price, I would at least pay back 5 times the price. Soul Imprint Ice Walker has been completely activated. All ice magic effects have been increased by 20%, and mana consumption has been reduced by 20%. You have obtained the passive ability, King of Winter. System notification: your opponent is still alive and well. Stop daydreaming. King of Winter. Passive: when the surroundings are completely covered in ice and snow, transform into the Lord of Ice and Snow, greatly increasing your control over ice and snow. When the ice and snow elemental cycle is completed, the surroundings will be treated as your personal domain. You will only need to pay a small amount of mana to maintain the domain of ice and snow. As my understanding of ice and snow improved, my soul imprint was completely activated. Under its buff, the snowflakes also became larger, and it became much easier to control fine ice and snow. Although it didn't seem like an improvement, the overall improvement in all aspects brought about a fundamental qualitative change. And right now, in a battle between 2 people, if one of them suddenly became stronger, it was only natural that his opponent would be unlucky. Now that I had complete control over this area, all the thin ice and snow within several hundred square meters became my eyes and ears. How could that little lizard underground possibly escape my senses? Ha! Roland's heavy punch! The heavy punch of ice and snow descended, and the dragon knight that had just popped its head out of the hole was hit by the heavy punch of ice and snow. It could only viciously dig back into the ground. The blue dragon saw that its master was at a disadvantage, so it angrily roared and struggled to get up. However, Little Red, who was on its head, fiercely stomped its foot, causing the blue dragon to howl in pain and collapse to the ground. And right now, I kept loudly shouting out the name of the spell as I viciously smashed it down on the ground. Since this was a completely original spell, according to Mage Customs, as the creator, I had the right to name the spell and add the inventor's name as the prefix. This was one of the highest honors for a mage. I had been eyeing Heloise's Shadow Steps and Amelia's Fruit Ripening spell for a very long time. Now that I had the chance, of course I would enjoy it. Roland's Ice Arrow. Roland's Ice Blade. Roland's many types of ice palms. Haha, I'm not a magic idiot. I want to fight 10 of you. Since his ambush on the ground had failed, Halent would have to return to the surface if he wanted to recover from his disadvantage. He kept smashing down on the Dragon Knight with all sorts of ice spells, and it was as if he was playing whack-a-mole. Just as I was proudly planning to go apply for a patent for this spell in 2 days, the silly cat actually jumped out at me again. Roland, new spells require innovative magical principles and unique spell models. Do you have one? Alright then, although it would be easy for me to trick noobs, I wouldn't be able to trick experts. While I could casually make up names, these seemingly different spells were still just variations of the same first circle spell, Ice Sculpture. Even if it had powerful control and control abilities and was very mana efficient, it was still only a basic spell. The Dragon Knight hadn't died even after taking so many hits, which meant that its attack power was obviously insufficient. It still needed to be perfected. Dragon Knight? Why does it only know how to run? Why don't you change your name to Cockroach? Large amounts of ice and snow transformed into giant ice blades that pierced through the ground, threatening Archduke Halent, who was underground. The most fatal part was that the ice and snow kept spreading like the roots of a large tree. It would soon catch its prey. He's obviously taking it out on me. I think he's angry because he's embarrassed. You're still calling yourself an adult? It's me. You're so immature that you're taking it out on others when you're in a bad mood. And you're always saying that others are immature. All right then, I'll pretend that I didn't hear my own people ridiculing me behind my back. Actually, this mysterious battle had already ended. While it was true that any ordinary mage would instantly die if a powerful warrior managed to get close to them, most situations were like this. The warrior would be dragged into the mage's battle rhythm, and even if he had tremendous strength, he would still be unable to get close to the mage. He would only be able to run around and be toyed with until he died. And if this situation continued and the cold continued to permeate the ground, the earth would be frozen solid. Naturally, his natural talent of traveling on the ground would become useless, and it would be impossible for him to come out even if he wanted to. So this is the Dragon Knight Archduke? Although this is within expectations, isn't it a little too disappointing? Heloise seemed to be addicted to ridiculing me as she immediately retorted. Don't make it sound so easy. With your equipment and frigid winter's buff, do you think there'll be any difference even if your opponent is a saint-rank warrior? That child is quite unlucky. From the very start, your frigid calamity aura kept stacking on top of each other to slow him down, and he was foolish enough to smash into an ice wall with his bare hands. I think that stacking on top of each other to such an extent has completely messed up his sense of time. Right now, we're at least 3 times his normal speed in his eyes. As expected of the fastest blue dragon bloodline. It's already quite impressive that he's able to dodge your magic attacks. Heloise seemed to recall something as she spoke in a rather displeased tone. Your ability is too insidious, especially that frigid calamity aura that slows down time. Anyone who doesn't have information about it beforehand will be at a disadvantage. Oh, I almost forgot. I didn't expect such an ability to exist. In that case, his normal speed is more than 3 times what he's displaying right now. That's truly dangerous. Although I said that it was dangerous, I actually didn't care about it at all. However, some people were impossible to judge based on common sense. The sudden development proved that Heloise had great foresight. Even though I had increased the speed of the Dragon Knight, I had still underestimated the Dragon Descendant Knight before me. Along with Halent's angry roar was an explosion of thunder. In order to make it easier to attack the enemy underground, when an ice blade pierced into the ground, the frozen ground there would instantly thaw. Although it was only a few milliseconds worth of time, Halent actually managed to jump out of the ground while being obstructed by the earth. Halent's angry roar shattered the descending ice blade, and his vertical pupils glared at me as if they were about to spit fire. The next instant, I understood how he managed to grab that 1,000th of a second to successfully rush out of the ground despite being repeatedly slowed down. Halent suddenly raised his greatsword and swung it backwards with great force, crashing into the ground and using the recoil force to throw himself out of the ground. So it's the recoil force. I instantly understood. Halent seemed to have discovered that he was being forcefully slowed, but since he was unable to dispel it, he came up with a stupid idea. Since his movements were being slowed down, then he would use the recoil force to throw himself out of the ground. This wouldn't slow him down at all. It was truly difficult to do such a thing when time was being sped up by 3 times, as well as to seize the opportunity. First, one would need to have beast-like instincts and the ability to predict movement coordinate. Even without all that, his ability to react in such a desperate situation was nothing to be scoffed at. However, I unhurriedly started chanting an incantation. I had long since prepared a dimensional door at such a far distance, so I increased the distance between us and continued smashing at the mole. Aim! The dragon descendant showed off his trump card. He tossed aside his greatsword and suddenly spread his wings. Blue lightning surrounded his body as he transformed into a physical cannonball that instantly accelerated. The fastest dragon showed off his natural talent ability. The next instant, his blood-red eyes appeared right in front of me. It's over. It's over. Both dragons said the same thing. Blue Dragon sounded rather delighted, while Little Red simply shrugged in boredom, as if she didn't care at all. As for me, I smiled as I looked at Halent, who was flashing with lightning. I slowly reached out my hand towards the air, and my adamantine staff that seemed to weigh several tons appeared in my hand. Then, I lowered my head, twisted my body, and swung my staff at the ball of flesh. Home run! What demon is this? Take this from old Sun. However, no one responded to my comment. With a beautiful home run, Halent flew backwards at twice his original speed and crashed into a wall. That's right, a wall. He was completely and utterly embedded into the wall, causing a part of the wall to collapse. He was in an even worse state than I was earlier. Ha! I'm the white-robed Gon. My magic is top-notch, and my staff techniques are top-notch. Who said that mages don't know martial arts? Duh. You want to compete with me in strength? You're 200 years too young. A normal dragon would only have around 25 strength, while a dragon descendant would have at most 23 strength. And with the divine power bracers that I had obtained from the earth elemental god, my brute strength had already surpassed the 30 mark. Dragons were on completely different levels. However, I didn't have the time to continue mocking my defeated opponent. Perhaps I was having too much fun just now, or perhaps Halent had some special communication technique, but while I was busy fighting with Halent, we were gradually surrounded by the enemies who were using the cover of the rainy night as cover. At this moment, there were more than 10 dragons in the sky and on the surrounding city walls. Who knew how many more were hiding in the shadows? Malicious gazes gathered behind us, while shadows of death circled in midair. The dragons weren't impatient at all. They had plenty of patience against powerful opponents, so they enjoyed hunting together. Should I say that I'm honored? We actually directly met with half a Dragon Knight squadron? Sigh, this battle is so strange. But before I could even think about how to deal with this, an elderly voice spoke up in midair, followed by a silver dragon descending from the sky. Your Highness Fina? Is that Princess Fina? Little fellows, what are you doing? Stop your attack formation. This is Princess Fina, a true member of the Bardi Empire's royal bloodline. I'm Johann, the leader of your Night Guards. Hearing that, Lilith was shocked, and her face was full of disbelief. She did not expect to meet an old acquaintance here, but if the other party was a dragon descendant, it was only natural. 100 or 200 years was nothing to the dragon clan. Lilith suddenly took a step back, as if she instinctively wanted to escape. But when she thought about Amelia, whose status was unknown, and how things had developed to this point, it was impossible to avoid Nightrain City no matter what. In the end, she could only grit her teeth and nod. Sir Johann? Long time no see. But please call me Lilith. Chapter 277. The heavy rain pitter-pattered on the roof beams, but the downpour showed no signs of stopping. Although according to the time, it was almost dawn, looking out of the window, it was still a misty rainy scene, and nothing could be seen clearly. Spring rain at dawn always calmed one's heart. Listening to the rain outside and enjoying hot cocoa by the fireplace would warm up my entire body, as if the fierce battle just now had been nothing more than a dream. Fine then, I'll just pretend that I didn't see the Dragon Knight Archduke, who was still glaring at me angrily. At the same time, I was furious that I wasn't given a cup of hot cocoa. This was blatant racism. Even if I gave it to you, would you be able to drink it? If I really gave it to you, you'd probably complain that I was just messing with you. Silly cat, leave some of your share for me. Heh, don't even think about it. Due to Lilith's sudden appearance, the originally tense situation was instantly resolved. After all, the Dragon Knight Johann had once been her bodyguard. In terms of seniority, Halent would even have to call Johann second grandpa. This was all a misunderstanding to begin with. Since neither side was injured or killed, it was quite easy to explain. Even if the undead were capable of dealing with the nobles in the capital, they wouldn't be able to deal with the dragons and the Dragon Knight. It was obvious that the Dragon Knight and the undead would never get along. And since the Dragon Knight Archduke held true power in the Dragon Knight army, being stationed in Nitraine City was, in a way, going against Emperor Roland's will. Archduke Halent of Nitraine City had already declared that he didn't care what happened anywhere else. As long as the undead dared to enter his territory, they would be killed without mercy. And not long after he said that, we arrived. I wanted to bang my head against a wall when I heard this. Perhaps I really should take some time to donate some money to the God of Fate's church. At the very least, I could try to wash away my bad luck. Especially since I heard that Halent himself was currently patrolling the city walls. If I hid in a carriage, I might have missed him, but I just had to openly sit in a carriage while the sentries on the city walls were all pointing at me. This was basically an insult to the Dragon Knight Archduke's dignity. How could I possibly tolerate this? And so, the following scene naturally occurred. What surprised me slightly was that the Dragon Knight seemed to be completely aware of Lilith's identity. They also knew that she was a member of the Blood Tribe, yet they didn't show any signs of disrespect or hostility. This was especially so for Sir Johann, who looked like he had just entered middle age, but was at least 200 years old. His expression as he looked at Lilith was far too complicated. There was respect, gratification, pain, and so on. His emotions were so complex, and the rapid changes in his expression were breathtaking. He could just go on stage and perform. After all, we were all involved back then. Although it's not up to me to comment, the Emperor back then, Princess Amelia, sighed. The elderly knight kept sighing. However, Lilith had a calm expression. She pretended as if she didn't see the emotional Dragon Knight in front of her. She simply held Carolyn's hand and ate some desserts, tasted some tea, and warmed up by the fire to relax and drive away the coldness. I had investigated Lilith's matter before. After Fina Milan transformed into the Blood Tribe Lilith Milan, that necrophilic Prince Sinnat was killed off not long after. Then, the throne was transferred to Sinnat and the other members of the royal family. The original direct bloodline of the Bardi Kingdom's royal family had already been cut off. If I had to force a name, there was still Amelia in the direct bloodline. However, nobody in the Bardi Kingdom dared to hope that this ridiculously high-ranking princess from 2 generations ago would ascend to the throne, not to mention leave behind any descendants who would inherit the throne. This was something that had happened over 100 years ago. Almost all of the old vassals from back then had died. A new emperor would bring new vassals. The so-called legitimate emperor was only the legitimate emperor for that period of time. 3 generations had already passed into their graves, so who would still remember the emperor from 3 generations ago? However, ordinary people might not remember, but the Dragon Knight and dragon descendants from back then were still alive and well. They believed in the Knight's Creed, so they still remembered the emperor they had been loyal to. Now that they saw that the princess who had been missing for over 100 years was still alive and well, of course they would be filled with excitement. It was also because of Lilith that we, undead, were invited into the room. Otherwise, even if we were the so-called imperial envoys, we would still be able to go wherever we wanted. If we were killed, we could only say that we deserved it. After all, Orlos wouldn't possibly have a falling out with the Dragon Knight over a single lich. After interacting with each other for a short period of time, I could tell from their attitudes that rather than calling them an army, they were more like a big family. That Duke Johann was able to use his seniority to angrily rebuke Halent for his recklessness. Meanwhile, that icy-faced handsome Archduke Halent had a helpless yet irrefutable expression, as if he was a naughty child being reprimanded by his elders. And as far as I could see, the famous Archduke Halent wasn't even the strongest Dragon Knight. There were quite a few in the room who had stronger draconic might than him. At the very least, that elder, Duke Johann, was obviously a saint-ranked existence. Could it be that Her Highness Fina is acting as a lobbyist for the undead? Although Johann had an expression of hesitation with his status, there were some things that needed to be asked. Everyone in the country knew that the Dragon Knight army didn't get along with the undead. How could the proud dragons possibly obey the orders of the filthy undead? However, Fina was also a vampire among the undead. Although she probably had nothing to do with the undead in the capital city, it was necessary to ascertain the reason why she came with the Lich Rex, as well as the standpoint she stood on. However, Lilith directly shook her head upon hearing this. I've already said that I'm currently Lilith, a member of the Church of Law, not Fina Milan. I don't want to care about the Bardi Empire's matters, nor do I have the ability to. We're here for something else. As for the Lich Rex, she shot me a questioning look. The meaning in her beautiful eyes was quite obvious. Should I expose you or not? If you want to reveal your true identity, do you want to say it, or do you want me to say it for you? I nodded but didn't say anything. Although the saying, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," wasn't necessarily correct, it was still better than being misunderstood as an undead emperor's subordinate. Otherwise, there would likely be an irreconcilable conflict between the two of them, and it would be impossible for us to pass through the fortress. This person who just beat up Archduke Halent is Lord Roland, famous for being petty and narrow-minded, Roland missed. Before I even finished speaking, Halent abruptly stood up. The shock and disbelief on his face were quite obvious. He knew who I was. I lightly spun the magic ring in my hand, and a sudden flash of light tore apart my false disguise. The moment that my physical body returned to me, I immediately snatched the silly cat's cup of hot cocoa and finished it in one gulp. Being able to enjoy the sweetness of food instead of watching others eat and drink from the side was truly wonderful. The silly cat gritted her teeth in anger, but she knew that this wasn't the time for revenge. The undying Roland? Yongya. The evil undying king. Even though I had clearly stated my identity, it seemed that the Dragon Knight's vigilance only increased. That Johann was even directly touching the hilt of his sword. Was my reputation really that bad? As the only undead emperor in the past 1,000 years, as well as the most classic demon king in all the fairy tales for the past several hundred years, can you at least have some self-awareness? My dear 27th place on the Calamity rankings. That's right, 46th place on the Calamity rankings. Heloise, I welcome your reminder. I've heard that due to our recent performance, even though you've disappeared from the world for a long time, your ranking has still risen. Just by not appearing in public, you're able to make others fear your existence even more. How does that feel? It's unfortunate that my sect should have kicked you out back then. While I maintained a serious expression on my face, Heloise and I continued chatting as usual through our mental connection. However, the Dragon Knight's side was already quite restless. They had their own information channels, so of course they knew that Roland Mist was Emperor Yongya, the only undead emperor in the recent generation. Could it be that he's also in cahoots with other undead emperors from other dimensions? I just heard that he caused a huge commotion in the Northlands. What's he doing here now? A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. In the eyes of the dragons, no matter how noble a mortal's status was, it would only be for a short moment. The ones truly worthy of respect and even fear would naturally be the undying, who managed to reach the top one step at a time. As for those on the Calamity rankings, they were all out-and-out monsters. Then that abomination just now was the carnivore Dang? Did I manage to escape with my life? Even the blue dragon Sishusler, who had transformed into a muscular man, felt some lingering fear. More than 1 or 2 dragons had died at the hands of this famous Shilua war god. In front of Dang, who was using his full power, even an ancient dragon would be nothing more than a mouthful of food. So what if Dang crushed a slightly famous adult dragon? By the way, one of Dang's forms was also on the Calamity rankings. It was just that not many people knew about it. Actually, if it wasn't for me stopping him, Dang's dragon form would have long since trampled Sishusler to death. Originally, the Dragon Knight's dragon form had believed that they had the overall advantage, which was why they had so calmly invited an uninvited guest to their fortress for a discussion. However, just looking at the former undead emperor before them, their so-called chances of victory had never existed. It would seem that Ah Dang had led off the seemingly superior dragon squadron. Lilith continued her introduction as if she didn't notice the suddenly tense situation at all. Yep, he's also Aunt Amelia's good friend and junior. This time, we've come to help Aunt Amelia. Relax, this time we're probably on the same side. At the very least, I don't have any good impressions of uninvited guests. Lady Amelia? The one who asked this question with a nervous tone was a rather tall female dragon knight. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and the silver scales on her forehead were quite obvious. She also had 2 curved dragon horns on her forehead. No wonder she would wear a full helmet when she was outside. I recalled that she was a dragon knight from 2 generations ago. Her name was Lucia. Judging from how nervous she was probably related to Amelia. Yes, Aunt Amelia and I were both at Port Victoria. My body was immune to the dimensional descent, but Aunt Amelia stayed there. How is that possible? How could that lady? The female dragon knight Lucia had an expression of astonishment, as if she couldn't believe that Amelia had met with misfortune. Scourges usually live longer. I can guarantee that Amelia is fine. It's just that she probably met with some trouble, which is why we're here. Can you let us pass? I took over the conversation. My patience and time were both limited, and I was already quite close to my goal. If the situation allowed for it, I would have set off long ago. I originally thought that since I said so much, it would be quite easy for her to let us pass, but the result was that she kept looking at me with awkward expressions. It seemed that there was a problem. After passing Nitrain City, we would be able to reach Port Victoria in another 14 to 15 days. However, the road that used to be easy to walk on had now become a black land that seemed to be poisonous. The slightly corrosive smell was nauseating. The formerly prosperous commercial port had now become a wasteland. Dense dark clouds constantly covered the sky, and even the ominous crows had fallen to the ground. This place had now become a forbidden zone for the living. A group of wild wolves were being chased by a gigantic semi-dragon. In their panic, they entered this forbidden zone. Not long after they entered this black land, they slowed down and finally collapsed. Not long after, the stronger semi-dragon hunters collapsed as well, and a new group of zombie wolves and bone semi-dragon appeared. According to the undead emperor's expectations, the area around Port Victoria wouldn't be affected much if the dimensional door was successfully opened. This was why Orlos had finally approved of this plan. However, due to certain reasons, things changed. Just like how a blocked sewage pipe would leak out from somewhere else, the magical forest's dimensional power had changed the direction of the corrosion. Apart from the undead, no one would be able to withstand such a negative energy zone. Although the undead would actually receive buffs in such a zone, even the undead were quite anxious. After all, the Dragon Knights had already issued an ultimatum. The moment this negative energy swamp entered human territory, which meant that Nitrain City's territory would be the time for war between the undead and the undead. The area in between the swamp of negative energy had become a buffer zone between the undead and the undead. Every day, dragons and gargoyles would patrol the sky. Of course, every time the dragons and gargoyles encountered each other, several gargoyles would appear on the ground. Not a single merchant group would choose to enter such a sensitive area in such a situation. As long as we left Nitrain City, it was likely that the undead would notice. After learning about the situation ahead of us, it would be almost impossible for us to quickly pass through if we didn't want to startle the undead. We could only slow down and gather as much information as we could. If possible, I would contact Amelia. I wasn't lying. I truly didn't believe that anything would happen to Amelia. But right after we finished our business here, Little Red mysteriously came looking for me. Judging from how she was trying to stifle her laughter, it seemed that she had discovered something interesting and wanted to share it with me. Hey, Roland, do you want to know why they have so many dragon descendants? Also, those Dragon Knight? Isn't that another family's secret? You know about it? TSK, what secret? I knew with a single glance. Didn't you notice that Halent and his dragon Sishusler really resemble each other? No matter if it's appearance or smell, they're 90% similar. They're definitely twins. I recalled how Sishusler had transformed into a brute, and then thought about that pretty boy Halent. They were twins? I suddenly felt like there was something wrong with Dragon's sense of beauty. Wait a moment, Dragon's sense of beauty? That means that in the eyes of dragons, Halent and Halent are basically twins. Alright, I pretty much understand what's going on. No wonder these dragon descendant knight have the same bloodline as their mounts. So they're all relative. No wonder Little Red was laughing up her sleeve. This really was a scandal about the surface dragons. Most dragon descendants were born from the union of dragons with other creatures. In the mortal plane, all sorts of semi-dragons' bloodlines were of great research value. It was indeed true that dragons were lustful by nature, but some unions weren't simply because of love. In such a situation, as a byproduct, it would be quite difficult for a half-blood to receive sincere treatment from their parent. Of course, it would be impossible to just ignore this. If a dragon descendant used their natural power to take revenge on society, not only would the irresponsible parents of the half-blood children be punished, even the entire dragons would be humiliated. So, that so-called Dragon Knight Squadron is probably just another type of nursery. If a dragon descendant with a sufficiently high bloodline obtained the assistance of their bloodline source, parents, and paid a certain price, they would be able to transform into a true dragon through a bloodline ritual. However, the prerequisite was that the dragon descendant would have to be sufficiently powerful. It was likely that they would have to be at least gold rank, and they would need to grow to a certain age. A dragon descendant's growth would take a long time. A relatively safe environment would be necessary. It would also be easier to obtain experience and wisdom in the complex human society. No wonder there were so many young dragon descendants in the Dragon Knight Squadron. It would seem that parents who didn't want to take care of their children would toss their children into the Knight Squadron. Young dragon descendants with long lives would receive the Knight's influence and brainwash from a young age, so they wouldn't do anything foolish. As for the dragon mounts, they were likely siblings sent here to accompany them through their long childhood. Spending several dozen years playing with their younger siblings was nothing to a dragon. My guess was that if a dragon didn't have any siblings, some unlucky dragon descendant would be sent here to be their guardian for a period of time in order to test their temperament. And since they were all siblings, it was only natural for them to ride on their back. Haha, no wonder they're all rookies. So they're all unlucky ones who have children. And what are you looking at? Oh, it's a letter from an old dragon. I heard that it was left for me by someone I know. Evelyn? What a strange name. Little Red, have you heard of it before? Chapter 278. I casually tore open the sealed letter, only to discover that it was actually the highest-level contract seal. There was also a magic seal engraved in beeswax on the gray envelope. If someone other than the recipient opened the letter would either be destroyed or explode. Evelyn? I've never heard of her. Yep, you never told us about her either. Although Little Red kept shaking her head, her eyes were smiling. Although dragons usually disdained lying, based on my understanding of her, her expression meant that she was waiting to watch a good show. There was no point in asking. And so, I unhesitatingly tore open the envelope slightly and placed it on a nearby table. Then, I stood near the door and used my hand of ice to open the envelope from afar. I was so smart. If only the bomb disposal experts in my world had my hands, they wouldn't have been killed in the explosion. Ha 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 ha. I completely ignored the female dragon who was laughing so hard behind me. I didn't know why, but when I saw Evelyn's name, which sounded more like an elven name, I felt my scalp go numb. It was as if my instincts were telling me that Evelyn was trouble, and that I should be more cautious. In order to avoid being tricked, I carefully hid behind the door. Meanwhile, the ice arm in the room disappeared the moment the envelope was opened, and then, are you kidding me? Nothing happened at all. There was no sudden flash of white light, no sudden screams of a banshee, no explosions, and not even some floating green or white powder. At the very least, there should be a death curse. This was a threatening letter that didn't even have a single trap installed. This was so unprofessional. Ah, I'm dying of laughter. What are you doing? Using your face to look in the bushes? Using your feet to step on traps? Alright then, let's continue ignoring the female dragon who was rolling on the ground laughing behind me. I picked up the letter and saw that it only had a few simple sentences. Ancient Elven language? Someone actually uses this language in this generation? Let me think, how should I pronounce it? The letter was written in twisted tadpole language. It would be normal if it was written in the dragon language or human language, but what was the meaning of using a language that only existed in the ancient Elven Empire? Was this Evelyn an archaeologist? The handwriting on the letter was beautiful and elegant. It was obvious that it was written by a female. However, the content was so confusing that I couldn't understand it. You dare to return? She read this sentence in a low voice. The grammar was correct, but why didn't I understand it? Was she complaining? As soon as he said that, the letter suddenly lit up, and then, damn it, it's actually a definite verb. Boom. Sure enough, the letter exploded. The explosion wasn't strong, but it released a strange smoke. When the smoke dissipated, I was covered in a layer of blue paint. Cough, cough, you actually purposely used a tongue-twisting ancient Elven language to lure me into reading out the keywords. How wicked. Cough, cough, cough. He didn't know what was used to create this trap. Even the dust it coughed out was blue in color. Fortunately, he could sense that this trap wasn't poisonous. Ha ha ha. As expected. The female dragon at the back was already rolling on the ground in laughter. She seemed to have expected this. What followed was a sudden flash of light in the sky outside the room. It was as if, when the letter was opened, something mysteriously left. The designer of the mechanism already knew that the letter had been activated. At the same time I turned into a smurf. A small pendant fell to the ground. The heart-shaped sapphire on it was giving off a cold radiance, just like moonlight. Seeing this, I knew that this was only the beginning. Trouble was probably waiting for me in the future. With such a powerful trap, it's impossible to believe that it wasn't someone I knew. Even though I still couldn't remember who it was, I became even more worried. Such a trap was obviously targeted at me. It was obvious that it was someone I was familiar with, but I couldn't remember anything at all. Not having any impression at all was fine. After so many reincarnations, I had already forgotten many different things. However, it was quite abnormal that my library of diaries didn't have any records at all. No matter how I thought about it, there were only two possibilities. Either I hadn't started writing in my diary yet, which was basically negligible, or those past events were memories that I wanted to forget, which was why I intentionally didn't write them down in hopes that I would completely forget them in a certain reincarnation. Well, if I can't remember, then I won't think about it. Since it's something that I decided to forget, it's obviously better not to remember. I was able to quickly forget about this little episode, but Little Red, who was intending to watch me make a scene, was displeased. You're living quite freely, aren't you? You won't think about it if you can't remember? I'm so envious of your attitude towards life. Aren't you worried that there'll be trouble waiting for you if you can't remember? There's nothing I can do even if I can't remember. Besides, if that person comes looking for trouble, even if I remember, there'll still be trouble, and it'll just be more troublesome. Since it's an enemy, I'll just deal with whatever comes my way. Isn't it just an old acquaintance? If there's a line of old acquaintances who want my head, it'll probably stretch from here to the West Coast. Have I ever been afraid of anyone? Although I said that, I still secretly strengthened the defenses of the rooms around me. Of course, I wasn't completely on guard against any unknown threat. When a new day arrived, I was able to relax slightly. Although the Dragon Knight behaved quite respectfully towards Lilith, and the knight was mostly a stubborn bunch, it was still necessary to be extra careful when we were in enemy territory. It was also necessary to be on guard. As we talked, I indeed obtained the most lacking information about the Bardi Empire. The information from the local domain lords was far too slow, unlike the Dragon Knight, who received news from the capital every day. The ambitious and ruthless Orlos was still alive, and the current Bardi Empire was naturally still under his control. However, although everything seemed peaceful on the surface, there were many hidden undercurrents. As the old emperor aged, the situation in the Bardi Empire became more and more complex. Nominally, the emperor was still supreme, but everyone was probably hoping for his death. This was especially true for the dozen or so adopted princes. Although they all seemed pure and innocent, they actually had a large faction under them, and they were all waiting for the old emperor to die and inherit the throne. Of course, there were still no princes who dared to interfere with the military. Yep, not on the surface, but the families of the princes' wives all seemed to be developing in that direction. As for the local domain lords, there was no need to even mention them. The conflict between the central government and the local domain lords would never be resolved. The rule that all the domain lords' eldest sons would have to grow up in the capital was indeed an extremely effective method of hostage control, but it also deepened the tension between the two. This rule had already been in effect for 20 years. The first batch of domain lords' eldest sons had already grown up, but very few of them returned to their territories to inherit the position of domain lord. This wasn't because the king didn't want to release the eldest sons, but rather because many domain lords chose to have their second sons who weren't in the capital. No second sons? They could just have another one, and once a second son became a domain lord, he wouldn't be as friendly towards his older brother who had legal rights to inherit the throne. Even now, there were very few cases where a second son would welcome the rightful heir back. The royal family's high pressure had caused quite a lot of resentment. Since the resentment had already accumulated, it was only a matter of time before there would be a backlash. It was likely that after Emperor Bardi died, no matter who ascended to the throne, that person wouldn't have the absolute authority to suppress the domain lords' collective backlash. It could be said that due to how powerful the central government was, the local domain lords had been living with their tails between their legs for the past 20 years. Now, they were probably all hoping that the mountain above them would collapse as soon as possible so that they could rise up again. It could be seen from the Bardi Empire's alliance with the undead that there were many internal conflicts within the Bardi Empire. Although Emperor Bardi had used his authority to suppress most of the nobles' objections, since there was no consensus, the internal divisions had long since begun. Apart from the various true gods' churches that directly broke off from each other, the most intense faction was probably the royal mages. From the day that this news was announced, the head royal mage Winst immediately took a sick leave, while the other royal mages all began closed-door training to research magic. The only thing that was slightly milder was the fact that the Dragon Knight Archduke and the Dragon Knight all left together. Halent's Dragon Knight group used their own methods to express their dissatisfaction with Emperor Bardi. However, further to the west, the Dragon Knight group that was still loyal to Emperor Bardi was about to enter the battlefield and attack the Mage country in retaliation. The Dragon Knight group had a rather special status. First of all, many of them were half-dragons, which meant that they were both humans and dragons. However, they had spent most of their time growing up in the human empire, so they were quite inclined to be humans during their childhood. Considering their status as knight, it was only reasonable for them to participate in the war since Emperor Bardi had sent out a message for war. But if it was possible, I didn't want to see a war between mega empires, especially one that was intimately connected to me. Combined with that strange system quest that required me to choose between raising my reputation in either the Mage Country or the Bardi Empire, it was likely that I would have to choose a side when the shadow of war between the two countries became unavoidable. I guessed that when I went to the Cloud Tower and accepted this so-called main storyline quest, I would most likely have to choose a side and participate in this war. If it was possible, I really wouldn't want the Dragon Knight group to participate in this war. That would escalate the war. The undead are already invading us. The longer we delay, the more prepared we will be, and the greater our chances of victory will be. If we just send all the top-level combat strength of both countries into this war, it'll only benefit the undead that will arrive sooner or later. That wasn't all I was thinking about. It would be far too much of a pity to just hand over the Bardi Empire to the undead emperors. And since the Bardi Empire's internal situation wasn't stable, the longer I delayed, the more the situation changed. For example, if the old emperor suddenly passed away, it was highly likely that the new emperor would turn on the undead. Congratulations! You have triggered a side quest. Stop the Dragon Knight group from participating in this meaningless war. Quest requirement: do your best to delay the Dragon Knight group's participation in this war. If you delay this for more than 3 months, this quest will be considered complete. Quest reward: lead to the former Dragon Queen Molly. Punishment for failure: Little Red's Fury. System notification: you can continue doing side quests without doing anything. You want points? No way. It would seem that as long as the main storyline was involved in the war between the two countries, it would be possible to trigger these side quests. Although I didn't have any points, according to convention, in order to do a good job with the main storyline, I couldn't leave out even a single one of these small details. Accumulating small victories for a major victory was the most reliable method. Something worth mentioning was that although I received quite a few looks of disdain when I warned the various countries that the undead were about to invade, when the undead really arrived, although the various countries still pretended to be deaf and mute on the surface, we received quite a few private contacts in hopes of obtaining relevant information and assistance. Of course, I was being serious here. I pointed out all the locations where the undead would invade in history. As for whether or not there would be any changes in the future, that was none of my business. In history, the Bardi Empire was the largest location where the undead would invade. After the undead began their full-scale invasion, the mega-empire Bardi was suddenly destroyed in just 3 short months. This was doubtlessly inconceivable. But when I organized all the information I had gathered, there were plenty of internal and external problems. I suddenly felt that it would already be amazing if the Bardi Empire could survive for 3 months. History didn't have any detailed records of what happened to the Dragon Knight group. However, it did record that a large number of bone dragons appeared after the Bardi Empire was invaded. Based on the current situation, even if the Dragon Knight group didn't die on the Mage Country's battlefield, they wouldn't be able to survive the subsequent undead invasion. It was completely predictable that all of them would die. But right now, trying to stop the Dragon Knight group was easier said than done. We were foreigners, after all, and we even faintly seemed to be enemies with the Bardi Empire. Even if Lilith tried to stop us, it was unknown how effective that would be. And as a knight group, as long as Emperor Orlos gave the order to attack the Bardi Empire, Halent and the others would have no reason to refuse unless they wanted to betray the Bardi Empire. Especially since they're currently fighting for revenge, it's even more impossible to stop them, unless we can prove that Emperor Orlos has gone insane, or that he's committed some serious crime against the Knight group. But when I thought about this, I chuckled. Hadn't there already been evidence of such a crime? Kasola's tears. What excellent evidence! It seemed that it was time to go talk to Halent. Right, the reason why the Dragon Knight group joined the battle was probably because they wanted to take revenge on that forbidden spell. I feel like that doesn't seem like the Mage Country style. Let's investigate it first. Chapter 279. The air would usually be fresher after a rain. However, due to the sudden northern winds, the air would always have a fishy and foul smell, making people feel mysteriously uncomfortable. The spring rain was unable to wash away the aura of death in the air. For the new residents who had just moved in, this was indeed the smell of home. They hoped that this world would be completely twisted into a part of the undead plains. However, the magical forest where the former port district was located was an impenetrable fortress. The open dimensional door would always be a threat. Outside the port district of Victoria, in the middle of several dozen gigantic soul-summoning towers, the power of death was constantly gathering and distorting here, transforming into a black pillar of light that covered the sky. Around this pillar of light that seemed to reach to the heavens was a distorted space. There were mountains and rivers in that area, and countless black figures seemed to be doing something. That was where the mortal plane and the desecration plane intersected. Undead would occasionally appear from the void. Liches and liches were busy with small mountains of broken limbs and corpses beside them. Most of the low-level undead that had just appeared were missing limbs. At the very least, they needed to be given spare parts that would allow them to walk normally. And the first thing the high-level undead would do after coming out of the dimensional barrier would be to thank the heavens or the god of fate for protecting them. After all, the dimensional barrier would clash with each other and the dimensional laws would clash with each other, which would be like trying to cross a dangerous strait in a storm. Not only would this require courage and power level, it would require even more luck. The undead emperors were no idiot. They already knew that this was a critical moment. In fact, they had spent countless amounts of effort and secretly prepared for this day. No matter how thorough their plans were, they couldn't stop a sudden misfortune from descending upon them. Based on how things were developing, if this dimensional descent really did create a new dimension, then the dimensional door to the desecration plane would have been opened for nothing. The harsh situation was right in front of them. If they couldn't destroy this new dimension's will, then the dimensional door to the desecration plane would likely be completely taken over by the desecration plane. Once the new dimension's will completely awakened, it would likely launch a large-scale counterattack. At that time, this dimensional door would be useless. Find a new location for dimensional descent? Let's not even talk about how to convince the Bardi Empire to make yet another sacrifice without achieving any result. Just now, the undead emperors had paid a tremendous price and risked their lives to personally descend upon the Bardi Empire. And even if they were able to successfully suppress Bardi's objections, the previous preparations at the port of Victoria would take more than 1 or 2 years to complete. In order to reach the dimensional descent standard, the soul-summoning towers there had been secretly operating for many years. The amount of Casolan's tears in the citizens' bodies was more than 5 times the average amount. How many years would it take to start preparing again? And it just so happened that dimensional laws were clashing against each other. Dimensional teleportation was basically a lucky draw. Low-level undead were cheap, and there were countless low-level undead in the death planes. It wouldn't be a pity even if 3 out of 10 low-level undead teleported here. However, it would be quite a pity if any mid-level undead teleported here. The concept of mid-level undead didn't exist in the mortal plane. Those without intelligence were considered low-level undead, while those with intelligence were considered high-level undead. However, in many death planes, due to dimensional laws that favored the undead, any undead that reached a certain level, around bronze, would be able to regain their experience and intelligence. It was precisely because of this that the undead planes had such a large population base that the undead planes were far more prosperous than the outside world had expected. Their civilization level wasn't low either. No intelligent lifeform would be able to endure being transformed back into a bloodthirsty beast that was driven by their instincts. They would still be considered important in the mortal plane, so how would they be willing to be transformed into beasts or slave soldiers in the undead planes? Mid-level undead, that lost their intelligence would only be considered slightly stronger low-level undead. They wouldn't even be able to use 1/3 of their original strength, which was an obvious waste. As for high-level undead, they were probably the most pitiful of all species in terms of birth rate, which made them even more precious. It was no exaggeration to say that undead armies would forever lack mid-level and high-level leaders. It would be far too unprofitable to gamble thousands of years' worth of resources on a single chance. Of course, the more powerful an existence was, the more likely they would be able to survive in such a situation. Naturally, they would have a higher chance of surviving through dimensional teleportation. But if they were unlucky and met with some sort of temporal rift, even the undead emperors themselves might not have the confidence to survive through dimensional teleportation. No matter how much they had to pay, the highest chance of succeeding was only 50-50. Gambling thousands of years' worth of resources on this single gamble was basically a gamble that they would definitely lose. But when the battle reached a critical point, they couldn't consider investments and expenditures anymore. Even if an entire brigade has to fight to the death, we must take down XXX Highland. This was a slogan often shouted in certain situations. Obviously, a small hill that had already been blown flat wasn't worth exchanging lives for. Even if they managed to take down the hill, they wouldn't be able to exchange it for any benefit. The most important thing was still the strategic significance it represented. Not being able to take down the hill or being a moment too late could result in the entire battle being lost. And right now, this semi-isolated undead plane that was becoming more and more independent was a strategic high ground that was being fought over. The Order gods could interfere at any moment. That was why, even though they knew that teleportation at this time would be a huge loss, the undead emperors unhesitatingly used everything they had after discovering that the undead emperors were starting to lose control of the plane. I'm here, I've seen it, I've conquered. That lucky ghoul walked out of the black pillar of light and didn't even have the time to celebrate that he was actually lucky enough to pass the test of death before he lowered his head in a pitiful howl. Large amounts of black mist left his body, and at the same time, his 100 years of rationality and experience were also gone. The ghoul that had just been speaking so boldly, and yet when he opened his eyes, he was nothing more than a drooling ghoul. He had already transformed into an evil creature that directly lowered his head and started gnawing on the corpses. Yet another unlucky fellow that was sent here without even understanding the situation. A corpse necromancer linked him with a death contract and ordered him to give way. They had seen far too many of such occurrences over the past few days, so they were already used to it. The next to walk out was an injured undead knight squad. Quite a few of them had broken arms and legs, and they barely managed to walk out of the pillar of light by supporting each other. Judging from how they were still able to maintain their rationality, they were all high-level undead. These were elite reinforcements and important figures. A corpse necromancer immediately came over to heal them and register them to be reorganized. All members of the Blood-Red Thorns Knight Squad are here. I am the squad leader, Albert. The corpse necromancer was actually an undead Lord-level Death Knight Lord. The corpse necromancer used his Death God's aura to heal the Death God's injuries as he registered the Death God's name. However, halfway through writing, he hesitated for a moment and asked this question. All members? Isn't the Blood-Red Thorns a famous knight squad from the White Ghost Valley? It's said that they have over 100 high-level Death Knights. The corpse necromancer was unable to finish his sentence as his pale hand was already gripping the corpse necromancer's skull. The Death Knight Elbert had an expression of anger. Crack. Should I say that everyone was happy? The talkative corpse necromancer once again showed what it meant by, you wouldn't die if you didn't ask for it. The Death Knight Lord also found a target to vent his anger on after suffering such heavy losses. However, he was unable to let go of his anger when he saw how many of his brothers had died. We haven't even entered the battlefield yet, and only 13 of our 136 brothers are left. Damned Osso, damned dimensional cracks, and damned fate. But so what if he complained? He wouldn't be able to change his fate as cannon fodder. Since the undead emperors had made up their minds, even undead lords wouldn't be able to escape their fate of death. Although the normal probability of being teleported was around 40%, this was an average of countless 0% and 100% odds. If they were unlucky, such as running into a blood-red thorn spatial crack, they would have a 10% chance of being unlucky. But even if he cursed the undead emperors for forcing them to enter the dimensional crack, it wouldn't change what would happen next. As dimensional invaders, they could only continue down this path to the very end. Soon, this Death Knight squadron, which had suffered heavy losses, would be brought to the Soul Summoning Tower for treatment. Then, the Death Knight Lords would be able to use their abilities as commanders to reorganize low-level and mid-level undead. As long as there were enough skeletons and zombies, a single Death Knight Lord would be able to lead an entire army. Plants vs. Zombies continued. The battle on the front lines hadn't stopped. But if one paid attention to the situation on the battlefield, they would notice that the undead hadn't sent out many high-level undead who were considered elite. Numerous camps had been constructed around the Soul Summoning Tower, and large numbers of undead laborers were working overtime. Soon, a fortress-level defensive line would be constructed. When adding fuel to the fire was no longer effective at reducing the enemy's combat strength, and would only serve as experience for the enemy's growth, not a single qualified commander would start a pointless battle. Every camp was filled with reinforcements from the desecration plane. It was evident that the undead were accumulating their military strength for an all-out attack. The small skirmish before them was nothing more than a scout on the front lines. Meanwhile, the wood spirits didn't seem to have any intentions of initiating an attack. After all, they would be greatly weakened after leaving the forest's protection. If they attacked the undead's territory, that would be the equivalent of leaving their own plane. They would lose their undying abilities, and they would have one less death every time they died. Naturally, they wouldn't have the ability to initiate an attack. The wood spirits were quite worried as they watched more and more undead troops appear. However, all they could do was continuously reinforce their defensive lines, reproduce, and create new war machines. For the undead, just their military strength wouldn't be enough. Due to the dimensional laws, it was impossible for the undead emperors to descend at their full power. They also had far too many powerful subordinates, so it would be difficult for them to directly descend. Even if they couldn't completely descend, it would still be a problem for them with their weakened power levels. But even if they couldn't do it, there was someone else who could. I never expected that I'd return so soon. The Lich Feyman slowly walked out of the dimensional laws. He sighed about how the world was unpredictable as he casually took the skeleton of a corpse Lich beside him and restored the lower half of his body that he had lost during the teleportation. With undead Emperor Osso personally helping him with the dimensional laws, even if he was unlucky and encountered a dimensional crack just like the unlucky Lich before him, he was still able to successfully teleport. As an undead lord who had reached the myth rank in the mortal plane, as well as one of the strongest undead in the world of Aichi, the former second senator of Shilua, Feyman indeed had the right to be proud. Although he had ultimately lost in Shilua's internal war, as the vanguard of the leading party in the Aichi plane, he was still highly regarded and trusted by the undead emperors. He had even been taken in as a disciple by undead Emperor Osso, who taught him many undead secret techniques and even obtained the opportunity to comprehend the dimensional laws of the desecration plane. Heh Omar. Lionheart. We still have plenty of time. Just wait for me to return and slowly calculate. Lionheart faintly saw the door to breaking through to the myth rank. His power level had greatly increased, and he wanted to take revenge. He also received full authority from undead Emperor Osso to become the frontline commander. It could be said that he had great authority. Not only that, as long as he could take down this small plane that could be used as a springboard, he could even become the overall commander of the entire undead invasion. It would only be a matter of time before the Yongye calamity happened again. Perhaps he would even be more powerful than that person from back in the day. Feiman smiled proudly when he thought of this. He felt even more spirited than before, and he even felt that losing Shilua's internal war might not have been a bad thing. Don't be happy too early. The will of a plane isn't easy to deal with. Let's hurry up and organize our army. I keep having an ominous premonition. Feiman was overjoyed just from obtaining the key to a higher power level, but the former first senator, the immemorial bone dragon Grikajo, received even more. Undead Emperor Aso's evaluation of Grikajo was, give him 200 years, and we'll have another undead emperor. That's right, Grikajo had received guidance from an undead emperor who had been born as a bone dragon. He had already accumulated enough to begin with, and he was now one step away from becoming an undead emperor. It would only be a matter of time before he opened the final door to the myth rank. It would only be a matter of time before he became the next undead emperor. Although Grikajo told himself to be careful, that was just his habit of keeping a low profile. He had always been the strongest undead in Shilua, and he had always been the strongest undead creature in this plane. Now that his power level had greatly increased, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone. It's a pity that that person isn't here. Otherwise, I could show him my newly obtained power. Now that Grikajo himself had reached that level, the immemorial bone dragon even faintly felt the desire to challenge that person who had always suppressed him. Oh! We'll definitely win. The living shall sleep forever, and eternal night shall arrive. Lord Grikajo has finally arrived. We can once again charge forward. Cheers attracted the attention of the two undead lords. It turned out that there was an incredibly gigantic bone dragon circling in the air above the campsite. An ordinary bone dragon wouldn't even be as large as one of Grikajo's claws. His wings of death were capable of blotting out the sky. This was the aura of a top-level undead. Many high-level undead naturally viewed this as an ally that had come to provide reinforcements. The undead army here had always been suppressed. One of the main reasons was that there hadn't been a top-level undead capable of controlling the situation. Now that it seemed that an immemorial bone dragon, who was at least at the myth rank, had arrived, it was only natural for the undead to be excited. Some well-informed undead even shouted out the name of the bone dragon that was supposed to arrive. Not far away, the real Grikajo had an expression of astonishment. He had never heard that the undead emperors had sent out another super bone dragon. Why did this bone dragon's figure seem so familiar? He felt as if he had seen this bone dragon not long ago. Gria! Feiman was the one who exclaimed in astonishment. Although Gria, who loved her appearance, rarely showed off her bone dragon form, in the final battle that decided Shilua's royal authority, this bone dragon that suddenly descended from the sky had almost wiped out the entire Dark Knight Council. Now that this familiar mana fluctuation was right in front of him, how could he possibly be mistaken? When enemies met, their eyes would turn red. Feiman was about to rush up and take revenge, but Grikajo stopped him. Wait a moment, there's someone on her back. So what if there's someone? With the two of us working together, who do we have to fear? Based on Gria's personality, who do you think she'll let ride on her back? It can only be that person. Could it be? The Lich Feiman was suddenly startled. He hurriedly cast an arcane eye spell, and what he saw was the Lich on the dragon's back. Grikajo was casually lying down on a recliner, wearing a pair of magical crystal sunglasses to bask in the sun while proudly waving his hand in greeting, just like a leader inspecting his troop. Suddenly, as if he noticed that Feiman was spying on him from the void, he smiled at the invisible eye and said something. Then, he snapped his fingers, causing the scene to return to the void. Long time no see. You've taken care of my child, so this time, let me personally play with you. Have a good game." Gricasio, who was far away, uttered the words of his soul. That abnormal mana fluctuation was undeniable evidence. However, Gricasio didn't need any evidence at all. Although Gricasio's mana fluctuations weren't very strong, just by looking at his seemingly calm but actually berserk soulfire, as well as his strange behavior that would forever be unfathomable, Gricasio was certain that that person had finally returned. That existence that even the undead emperors were so afraid of actually existed in the mortal plane. It had been so many years, yet Gria had only faked his death. Just what scheme was he plotting behind the scenes? Why did he appear at such a critical moment? Yongye, impossible, impossible. Gricasio was still able to maintain his calm, but Phaeland had an expression of complete collapse. Phaeland had once been one of Emperor Yongye's advisors, so of course he knew how frightening Gria was. Phaeland had previously dared to establish the Ike Parliament faction to suppress the royal authority faction because he was certain that Gria would never return. Meanwhile, Gria seemed to have received enough cheers and applause. She changed directions and flew towards a patch of green in the distance. When Gria slowly glided past the dark clouds and arrived above the heads of the two undead lords, she actually circled in the air. Feyman and Phaeland could clearly see that Gria was happily waving at them on the dragon's back. Gria was even blowing kisses and waving at them. His enthusiasm made it seem as if he was a good friend who hadn't seen each other in a very long time. "Hi!" Even Gria's enthusiastic greeting was heard. "Hi!" Phaeland was actually frightened to the point that he hurriedly waved his hands in greeting when that familiar soulfire stared at him. This wasn't any spell. It was merely an instinct formed from the pressure he had accumulated over the years. Only after receiving a response from Gria did the Lich in the sky nod in satisfaction. He patted the bone dragon, and Gria slowly continued gliding towards the forest. Seemingly believing that Gria was going to attack the enemy right after the reinforcements arrived, another round of cheers erupted in the army camp to send off the bone dragon. Long live Lord Gricasio! Long live Emperor Aso! Only the two new commanders remained where they were, still in a daze. Gricasio, who had just been praised as "Long live the Emperor," had an expression filled with hesitation. Gricasio's ambition to defeat his superiors had just risen up in him, but he had been frightened by that person's appearance. Gricasio seemed to have unknowingly vanished into thin air. In the end, the two of them stared at each other blankly as their enemy left. They completely forgot their duties as commanders. Neither of them had the courage to stop Gria even after she disappeared from their sight. After all, they would probably have to directly face Gria, an existence who had suppressed them for more than 100 years just by relying on his lingering aura even after his death. Sigh, let's just take over the army like before. That way those kids won't be impulsive and rush out after us. Yeah, let's not keep them waiting. Let's hurry up and go. This is ridiculous. We actually mistook the highest level leader of our army for someone else. Alright then, when Gria reappeared in front of them, these two were still mega undead lords who gave even the true gods headaches. They were obviously just stray dogs who had been scared out of their wit. They had been living under Gria's shadow for far too long. Chapter 280. There were many forests in the Aichi continent, both well-known and unknown. The most dangerous magical forest was located in the Bardi Empire. Even I didn't dare to go there. There weren't even a few goblins in a peaceful forest, especially the forests that the elves lived in. They contained countless treasures and secrets, and would often be forbidden grounds for other species. However, walking in a forest would be quite different. The Silver Elves' forests were peaceful and quiet. For example, in the Silver Mirror Forest, I could faintly see sentinels and rangers hiding under the leaves as I walked through the forest. The Centaur Knight who was patrolling the forest was also fully armored. The fully armored Unicorn Knight was powerful and holy. If I had good hearing, I could even hear the knight's movements and the sound of a bow in the distance. However, I still had to be careful. There would always be spying gazes and whispering behind my back. After walking for so long, I didn't even meet a single wild elf. It was obvious that humans were being guarded against here. But if I looked at it from a different angle, everything would be different. Should I say that it was to be expected of the superior elves who specialized in combat? Rather than calling this a peaceful forest, it was more like an elven military camp. Although their bows and lances were exquisite and extravagant, the enchantments and materials used on them were of such high quality that anyone would be green with envy. Their standard equipment was so good that even legends would be green with envy. The Unicorn Knight's extravagant equipment made me want to rob a tycoon. The Moon Elves' forest had beautiful scenery. The plants here were flourishing to the point of being unnatural. It was possible to see all sorts of god sculptures and artwork while walking through the forest. Even the elven treehouses were carved with countless patterns and designs. The elves' living environment was also the most comfortable. Unlike the Silver Mirror Forest, where you couldn't see anyone while walking through the forest, ordinary elves could be seen everywhere in the Moon Elves' forest. They weren't that wary of outsiders, and it was even possible to buy some small handicrafts from roadside vendors. Yep, I was referring to the former Tassel Kingdom. Now, although they had transformed into Greyblood elves and had the elves' unique craftsmanship and magical techniques, their equipment was still the typical model of extravagant but impractical. Their expensive enchantments were only used to make their artworks seem more beautiful. As for me, if I couldn't get rid of their extravagant decorations, it would be better to sell their products as art. It would be more worthwhile to use them to buy dwarven product. As for the last remaining superior elf species, the Wood Elves had lost their own kingdom. The forest they lived in was no longer their own territory, and they no longer had the ability to change the forest's environment. However, they had always been the forest's favorite. They wouldn't use nature magic to change the environment. The Wood Elves' territories were usually the most natural, and they lived in was no different from any other species. It was common to see powerful creatures that were rarely seen in the outside world, such as mountain giants, treants, drool, little Red Riding Hoods, and so on. Of these creatures were the Wood Elves subordinate. Elf, and Tutu to protect the forest. The Wood Elves had the best reputation among the elves due to their peaceful natures. They were one of the few superior elves who didn't look down on others. Many Wood Elves also had a tradition of traveling. Since they loved life and loved to travel, they were often welcomed by all species. In fact, some royalty even invited them to become outstanding instructors. However, this world wasn't just filled with kindness. If the Wood Elves were completely defenseless, perhaps the Wood Elves, who were viewed as treasures by some, would have long since gone extinct. The natural forest was the best shelter for the Wood Elves, and the powerful creatures in the forest would be the Wood Elves' natural allies. All the trees and plants in the forest would constantly watch over foreign invaders. In front of a living forest, even those with unfathomable intentions wouldn't be able to find the path to the Wood Elves' home. The Wood Elves in the forest weren't to be trifled with. The Wood Elves in the outside world were also not to be trifled with. If the wandering Wood Elves were forced into a corner, they would be able to use nature's wrath, a species' natural talent ability that could only be used once in a lifetime. This ability would allow the Wood Elves to transform the entire surrounding forest into a group of relentless avengers. Although not every Wood Elf possessed such a talent ability, it would likely be a loss on the level of a forbidden spell if a Wood Elf ran into one. That was why all countries strictly forbade any illegal actions against the Wood Elves. But today, the moment that I stepped into this forest, I felt like the entire world had changed. This powerful feeling of being in a different world made me dizzy, and it was impossible to get rid of the dizziness. As far as the eye could see, the breathing plants and forests gave off a strong sense of life. Yes, it was a sense of life. This forest was alive. It was breathing, it was napping. From the moment you entered, it had opened countless eyes and was silently watching you. Oh my, how unfriendly. Flying in the dense magical forest was obviously not a wise move. The bone dragon stopped at the edge of the forest, but the moment it transformed into its human form, a purplish-green wall of thorns suddenly rose in front of Griya. Sensing Griya's undead presence, the forest that was fighting against the undead unhesitatingly closed its door, refusing her entry. As for me, the path that suddenly opened up seemed like a secret path leading to a fairy tale. Flowers bloomed on both sides of the path, as if they were welcoming guests. The moment that I stepped onto the grassy path, a wall suddenly rose up behind me, almost causing Griya to crash head-on into it. This obvious difference in treatment caused Griya to feel like she was about to die from anger. But when I entered this forest, I was secretly astonished. This powerful feeling of being in a different world had already materialized. The ridiculously abundant life force of the plants in this forest was doubtlessly the best explanation. This forest was the ruler of this world. This was the core of this world. What astonished me the most were the plant life forms on both sides of the path that slightly lowered their heads and smiled at me in greeting. Although their physical appearances were quite different from ordinary life forms, and their fibrous wooden bodies made them seem out of shape and strange, their souls and expressions clearly indicated that they already possessed independent thoughts and intelligence. They were intelligent life forms no different from ordinary humans. It's wonderful that you came. Mother will definitely be happy. A child's voice echoed in my ears. A small wood spirit was waiting for me on a tree branch, not far away from me. Seeing that I noticed her, she immediately jumped down. Only now did I notice that she was far smaller than her fellow wood spirit. She looked quite similar to an elf child, but she reached up to my waist. You are Mother's second daughter, Diligence. We've already met you before. It's just that you recognize our current appearances. She had light red hair that was completely different from Amelia's. Her face was even more exquisite than that of an elf's, and her thorny flower petals were the best accessories. Her thorny skirt only covered her most important parts, and even her little feet were stepping on flower petals. As she walked, the fragrance of the flowers would scatter everywhere. She was just like a forest fairy from a fairy tale. Although her facial features were quite similar, I would say that her physical appearance was only 30% similar. That was because in my memories, Amelia would never have such a healthy and sunny smile. She would either be laughing hysterically or laughing evilly under her mage robes. Meanwhile, the cute little girl in front of me had the purest kindness on her pink face. Just looking at her made me feel like she was a good child full of energy. How could she possibly be related to Amelia? The 7 virtues. I paused in surprise for a moment as I recalled that frightening man-eating garden. But then, I felt that it was only natural. Since Amelia had already reached such a realm, it was only natural that her 7 virtues would be completely independent. She would have an independent sense of self, and it was even possible for her to betray the Creator. In that case, the first thing I needed to do was, "You still don't have a name? How about I help you come up with one?" Since we were going to be in a relationship, how could I not know a name? Of course I needed to come up with one first. There's no need, there's really no need. I already have a name. My older sister helped me come up with it, Rosa. Rosa seemed to be frightened by my enthusiasm as she hurriedly took 2 steps back and lifted her up into the air with her petals. She seemed like she was about to run away at any moment. That's so uncreative. You're originally a rose of the rose genus, yet you're directly using that as a name? That's so insincere. At the very least, it has to match the colors, right? How about true red? Right, you have an older sister? Is she white? How about calling her Quicksilver? Rosa seemed to have never interacted with anyone else since she was born. When I suddenly approached her, she had an awkward expression and became even more flustered. But then, she suddenly quieted down as if she was listening to something. Older sister, I want to ask you. Are you intending to gather a 7-color combination? However, we only have 3 sisters right now, and she isn't white. It's impossible for us to gather a 7-color combination in such a short period of time. That's why I appreciate your good intentions. I still wanted to say something, but little Rosa seemed to hear something. She covered her ears and disappeared into the forest, leaving behind only one sentence. Older sister wants me to go help her. You can find mother if you follow this path. Hurry up and go. She left, but her bell-like voice still echoed in the forest. As expected of a rose's incarnation, her faint floral fragrance was instinctively intoxicating, making me want to inhale as much as I could. However, I directly got up and left. After all, I knew that Amelia's diligence was the most proficient at creating poisonous fragrances. If I accidentally inhaled too much of it, it would be fatal. However, as I walked down the path, I felt a mysterious sadness in my heart. Although I had created 5 original sins, and my individual power level was far stronger than Amelia's, who only had 3 virtues, which was why I always felt that I was superior to her in the field of creation, just looking at that cute little girl made me feel like I had completely lost. I had even lost at the very beginning. I've lost. Forget about the fact that everyone here is male apart from that silly cat. Why is it that not a single one of them has normal values and aesthetics? There's a silly dog that can't even play bocce ball properly, a zombie that transforms into a spaceship man, a damn fatty that can't eat his fill, and a muscular dog egg with a strange aesthetic sense. If I compare all of them, it'll be a shoujo manga, an idol drama, and a fairy tale style story, while we have a horror movie and a comical manga. How can I accept this? In the end, my extreme sadness made me shout out. Amelia, there's such a huge difference in style. Can we switch? I know that you hate men, so I'll give you the silly cat. If you think it's too little, I can even throw in a dog egg. He's capable of changing his physical appearance, and he can transform into any beauty he wants. I don't have high requirements. Just give me that Rosa from earlier. Clang. A gigantic pine cone suddenly smashed down with enough momentum to knock me over. This seemed to indicate a certain someone's attitude, but I heard from above me, "You stinky bastard, that made mommy sad, hurry up and leave." When I looked up, I saw a tiny purple figure walking away from the treetop. The 3 sisters? Is that temperance or modesty? Why are they all in the form of young girls? Does Amelia have so little trust in adults and men? Forget it, since I'm already here, I'll find out sooner or later. As I walked down this path, what astonished me the most wasn't the virtues I just saw. In the forest, some mature wood spirits were chatting, some young ones were chasing each other, some were cultivating new magical plants, and some were indeed enjoying the sweetness of fruit. They would even use shiny leaves as currency to trade. This forest world was filled with life, and it had its own social activities and market cycle. It was likely that I had lost in more than just the appearance of my creations. It was obvious that this forest originally didn't have any paths. If I followed the path, I would meet with many obstacles. However, the flowers in the fields would lower their heads and avoid me, while the towering trees would suddenly uproot their roots and move elsewhere. Thorny fences would automatically bury themselves into the ground. The deeper I walked, the more I faintly sensed that a will was summoning me. Amelia? After passing through the forest, I arrived at a quiet lake. The lake reflected the weeping willows and the blooming lotuses on the lake. A green-haired sleeping beauty was currently sleeping soundly on the petals of the largest water lily in the middle of the lake. A cool breeze brought her coolness, and moonlight from an unknown source illuminated the boat made of flower petals. The open sky was actually dotted with stars, and her snow-white skin seemed rather delicate under the starlight. I'm coming. Before I even finished speaking, countless memories and illusions formed a new world that I was instantly dragged into. What I saw before me was a dream world that surpassed the boundaries of reality and imagination. Chapter 281. I don't want to grow up. Every child had such a thought before. Adults wouldn't be able to understand children's words. The world in their eyes was colorful, completely different from the reality of adult. There would always be frightening demons hiding under the bed. Grandma Black would come out at night, and the story of the dragonfly and the white rabbit would continue tomorrow. If they secretly closed their eyes, the little elf living in their boots would help them finish their annoying homework, and the reward would be vegetable juice that didn't taste good at all. In their eyes, the end of the world was only a topic for adult. Tonight's lunch would be the annoying celery. Mary from next door bought yet another doll. Blackie from the blacksmith shop was really annoying and got beaten up by his father again. These important matters, in the children's world, were the most important topics. However, children would eventually grow up into adult. When they became parents, they would treat the love story of the grasshopper and the hamster as a joke. They would casually toss their past clay figurines and dolls into the storeroom. Childhood was often wonderful. However, people were destined to grow up. The treasures that were previously kept in boxes would eventually be viewed by themselves as trash that took up storage space. However, some people were destined to never have a childhood, such as Amelia Milan. I want a playmate. The craziest personality came from a lonely heart. When she discovered that all the adults around her were filled with filthy thoughts and desires, and that even her friends were puppets sent out by the adults to fight for benefits, the little princess sealed off her heart and refused to grow up. I refuse, I refuse, I refuse, I refuse. Amelia Milan, who hated adulthood, erected a thick wall of protection around her heart. She stubbornly lived by herself in her own fortress. If anyone insisted on getting close to her, the poisonous thorns would instantly take their life. That's right, from the very start, she was the sleeping beauty from the fairy tale, the princess who used her endless years of sleep. Everything originated from the soul. Magic was the embodiment of the soul. A child's fantasies were the cruelest and most fantastical. As the years passed, the little princess transformed into a witch and returned to the mortal world. The forest of dreams, which was like a fairy tale, became Amelia's mental world and home. However, it also revealed her true nature. By the purest of coincidences, Amelia's physical body transformed into her own fairy tale kingdom. As the creator, she had a miracle of having her wishes come true, and everything happened just like that. I want my family. Her past stubbornness caused her to loathe complex humans. Only simple plants were the closest friends that she was willing to open her heart to. Meanwhile, plants without intelligence were far too simple. Even though they were unable to communicate with each other, they were still unable to alleviate the loneliness in her heart. And so, the wood spirits were born. Men aren't to be trusted. Adults aren't to be trusted either. Men aren't to be trusted. Adults aren't to be trusted either. That was the best explanation. Plus, due to her natural talent, men's filthy desires were placed right in front of Amelia. She always felt that it would be better for men to all die. As for women, if the mask of friendliness and respect was torn off, women's jealousy would make her feel even more uneasy. What Roland had always been unable to understand was that the witch Amelia was actually quite nice to children, especially little girls. But now, it seemed that only little girls wouldn't have any evil thoughts. As for little boys, when she thought about how he would eventually grow into a stinky man like Roland, Amelia had the urge to feed him to the man-eating flower. The creator goddess was just that willful. But after she gained control of this dimension's source, she gained the ability to turn her own fantasies into reality. And so, due to Amelia's choice, the true appearance of this species became a young girl like Rosa. The gigantic plant giants and the 3-meter-tall treants were only the strengthened outer shells that they controlled. Their true bodies were hidden within the gigantic trunks. All of them were young girls. This species of young girls was unimaginable. In the future, this forest would become a holy land in the hearts of some people. When I came into contact with the lake, countless memories and fantasies surged into my mind, and a gentle voice echoed in my mind. That was the Creator's blessing for this world and its people. The gentleness and motherly nature in the voice made me instinctively feel warm and comfortable. Children, my first gift is the virtue of humility. Only with humility can you make progress. Only by understanding your own shortcomings can you make up for them one day. Children, as a reward for humility, I shall grant you the ability to learn the strengths of other life forms, as well as the ability to imitate the unique abilities of other life forms to help yourselves evolve. The light of a blessing echoed in the forest. With their mother's blessing, every single wood spirit gained the natural talent of high-speed learning. Children, my second gift is the virtue of generosity. Sweet fruits will become even sweeter after they are shared. And as a reward for learning generosity, I shall grant you the ability to connect minds. Under my protection, nobody will be able to separate you from each other. And the forest shall become your most trustworthy ally. Words were unnecessary for the wood spirits. They had inherited a portion of Amelia's communication abilities. It was enough for them to communicate with other species and plants. Children, my third gift is the virtue of purity. Pure young girls don't need to be polluted by adulthood. Pure love doesn't need to be tainted by lust. Beautiful love is the sweetest candy. And as a reward for learning chastity, I shall grant you the ability to forever maintain your childish willfulness. And if you truly fall under the curse of love and intend to leave behind the fruit of pure love, you can also abandon your boring sexual relationships and use the unique method of the forest's descendants to give birth. This was impossible to comment on. Perhaps it was a certain someone's obsession with cleanliness. Countless books were written about the wood spirit's reproduction method. Children, my fourth gift is the virtue of kindness. Please learn to understand the hardships and difficulties of others. Blind conflict will only bring more trouble. A peaceful attitude will allow you to become a true victor. And as a reward for learning kindness, I shall grant you the fortune of being undying. Nobody will be able to steal your soul from me. As long as you are under my protection, death is nothing more than a short hibernation. The battle against the undead had already proven this. In this forest they were truly undying. The mystery of the wood spirit's evolution had been revealed. The 7 virtues were the path to Amelia's soul. The blessings from the 7 virtues allowed her children to evolve to such a level in such a short period of time. But the current Amelia was only able to complete 4 blessings. She didn't have the ability to complete the remaining blessings of temperance, diligence, and patience. Otherwise, the wood spirits would have become an independent and complete species long ago. They wouldn't have to be trapped in this world. There wasn't a mother who didn't want her child to be kind and healthy. Amelia's open heart transformed into the creator goddess Amelia's greatest blessing. The wood spirits had grown to such a level according to their mother's wishes. That meant that the purpose of summoning me here was probably to instinctively ask for my help. It would seem that I'm going to suffer a huge loss this time. I gently caressed the Sleeping Beauty's face. Her smooth skin was abnormally soft, and there were even tears in the corners of her eyes. The usually crazy witch's gentle appearance would make anyone subconsciously want to love her. I sat down cross-legged next to her bed and closed my eyes. I also opened my heart and soul to the world around me. I learned what I could do from the fantasy I had just obtained. Now I would continue Amelia's unfinished blessings, allowing this new species to break away from their mother's support and become truly independent in this world. In the near future, this new species would even be able to travel through all the dimensions. Temperance? Diligence? Patience? I'm sorry, I don't have any of those. Amelia, if you're willing, I shall use my own method to give my blessings to these children. Just spoiling your children won't do. Your method of education is obviously too extreme. Creations that are too pure will easily die young. The lake started glowing as the will of the world, that was connecting to it transformed into the light of the origin of light. After I obtained the power of creation and received an answer of approval, I gave my own blessing. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call it a curse. The blessing of temperance? I'm sorry, I only have the curse of gluttony. But please don't overlook the benefits of eating for growth. A strong body is the cornerstone of everything. Children, when you accept my gift, you who have endless appetites shall have the right to take root in the ground and obtain the earth's milk. You shall also have the right to devour other living creatures and non-living creatures to recover from your injuries and evolve again. When the light of origin shone, the wood spirits who had taken the next step on their path of evolution all became much stronger. Numerous roots and tails appeared on their backs in preparation for taking root in the ground. Their ugly, strengthened outer shells also grew several dozen tentacles. From now on, if a wood spirit was too heavily injured, she would be able to take root in the ground and swiftly recover. As for the ability to devour other living creatures, in the near future, it would be viewed as a forbidden killing technique that could only be used to save one's life. The blessing of diligence? I only have the curse of sloth. Diligence sounds nice, but being overly eager to enter someone else's life will only cause them trouble. Don't allow others to disturb your rhythm. Be content with being lazy. You who are used to being cold don't need the approval of others. Your will shall be as firm as a rock, and no illusions shall be able to stop you from improving yourself. Your will shall be as firm as steel, and you shall be able to live forever just by being alone. When the light of origin shone again, the wood spirit's eyes shone with a silver light. From now on, they would become the natural enemies of illusionists and psychological abilities. Silence, fear, shock, and other such mental magic would be completely ignored by them. The blessing of patience? Of all virtues, this is the one I laugh at the most. Is mere patience even considered a virtue? What I'm gifting to you is the curse of wrath. Why do you need to be capable if you don't like it? Being capable to the unjust is just a form of indulgence. At times like this, you should viciously punch them. Accept my gift. This is the blessing of the Hound of Wrath. After the light of origin shone again, the wood spirits obtained the power to strengthen themselves through emotions. Their outer armor also grew sharp spikes for charging. From now on, the wood spirits would be able to suddenly explode with power that surpassed their normal level. Not a single living being would be willing to engage in melee combat with these seemingly weak little fellows. Right, it's time for me to give you all a name. How about we call you wood spirits? Wood as in trees, spirits as in spirits of all things. After all 7 blessings were completed and their true names were confirmed, the creation of the wood spirits was finally completed. The dream forest, which had been shining brightly just a moment ago, suddenly dimmed. It was time for her children to enter hibernation and grow up. That was why she had entered the night. Thank you, father of my species. Wait a moment. Don't call me that. Hey, don't sleep. You'll die if you speak clearly. However, I didn't receive an answer to my question. All of the wood spirits, including the 3 virtuous virtues, were suddenly wrapped up by the forest's roots and slowly dragged into the ground. The magical forest and its inhabitants entered hibernation together. The wood spirits would complete their final transformation there. As for me, my work wasn't finished yet. More accurately, the most troublesome part had only just begun. Amelia opened up her soul to allow the wood spirits to grow. However, she obviously lacked combat experience, and her own soul had entered hibernation as well. She could only allow the wood spirits to grow based on their instincts in battle. However, this was obviously rather slow, and they relied too much on their instincts in battle. If it wasn't for the fact that the wood spirits possessed undying bodies, and that their enemies lacked high-level combat strength, they would have long since been defeated by the undead army. However, undying bodies didn't mean that they were invincible. There were hundreds of spells and tools in the mortal plane that specifically targeted the undead. I already saw two old acquaintances. Although I had always been stronger than them back in the day, they were both undead lords that had accumulated power for thousands of years. In terms of seniority, they were my seniors, and nominally, they were my collaborators. Naturally, their power levels wouldn't be weak. Plus, they knew countless undead secret technique. Our enemies wouldn't be easy to deal with. But who was I? I was a former undead emperor. I absolutely didn't believe that there was anyone in this world who could surpass me in my understanding of undead soldiers and powerful undead mages. Since Amelia had already opened up her soul to allow the wood spirits to grow, I wouldn't be stingy. Right now, all I needed to do was open up my soul and share my past combat experience through the wood spirits' mental connection. I would also give suggestions for the wood spirits' evolution, such as simply increasing their combat strength, or making targeted changes to the undead army. Although it was unrealistic for the wood spirits to evolve again in such a short period of time, there was still plenty of room for improvement in the forest's defense lines, magical plants, wood spirits' strengthened shells, combat methods, and ideology. You guys are so kind. Since all the tree's roots are on your side, why don't you have any tripwires that suddenly form? Also, don't put your important facilities and residences on the ground. It's too dangerous. Be careful of large-scale magic and assassins. It's much better underground. Come, since they're undead, worship the holy light together with me. Relax, you don't need to truly believe in them. Let me teach you how to fool that divine power server. Come, first learn how to praise the holy light while cursing the god of holy light. Be careful of Bone Dragon's corrosive breath. That's basically the natural enemy of all plants. That's why we need to prepare a net specifically designed to capture dragons. Although they're gigantic, their control over their bodies is far weaker than a living dragon's. Their senses are ridiculously weak, so we can use traps to deal with these blind creatures. Amelia's database had far too little information on the war, but I had far more. Soon, even though they were in hibernation, the wood spirits who had obtained combat experience and information began to come up with new suggestions and plans. And so, under the cover of night, the entire forest began its own journey of evolution. It was likely that the next time the undead came here, they would receive a pleasant surprise when they saw that their enemies had completely changed. After I finished all this, I stood up and stretched my body, which was now covered in leaves and vines. Perhaps those foolish children believed that this would prevent them from catching a cold. She seemed to be having a good dream. Unknowingly, the sleeping beauty, who was still in a deep sleep, had a smile on her face. If you want to become a complete dimensional will, you'll need sufficient sacrifices and souls to replenish yourself. Is that why you're still unable to awaken? Alright, it would seem that the sacrifices will automatically come to you soon. A pitch-black army was gathering on the horizon. I estimated that when the army gathered to a certain degree, a new battle would erupt before dawn. Sleep in peace. For the sake of these little things, I'll prepare sufficient sacrifices for you. Chapter 282. The Strait of Knives was named for its long and narrow shape. The currents there were rapid and there were countless submerged reef. Normally, however, there would be an endless stream of ships coming and going. It was quite a prosperous place. After all, this was the only way to the Bardi Empire's outer seas. It was a true golden sea. Merchants who often traveled by sea said that the Strait of Knives was also known as the Silver Strait. As long as one traveled by sea for 3 years, one's wealth would double. It was easy to imagine just how profitable this sea route was. After passing through the strait, one could head west to the Mage Country to purchase all sorts of magical artifacts and materials. One could head east to the various port cities of the New Moon Empire and the Bardi Empire. One could make a huge profit just by using the sea route to transport special products from the various ports. As the Bardi Empire's situation became tense, the number of merchant ships traveling here greatly decreased. On one hand, the New Moon Empire and the Bardi Empire's various countries were now part of the Bardi Empire, so there wouldn't be much profit from traveling by sea. On the other hand, the Mage country and the Bardi Empire were currently in a tense relationship with each other. A naval war could erupt at any moment, and it would be too pitiful to become cannon fodder. But today, the gradually calming strait wasn't as quiet as it used to be. A small but significant naval battle was currently taking place. The two sides fighting had nothing to do with the owner of this sea. That's right, they weren't from the Bardi Empire, nor were they from the Mage country. The battle happening here was purely coincidental. On one side there were two gigantic sea beasts. If Roland was here, he would probably recognize one of them as an old acquaintance. It was a seven-headed dragon that emitted a blue radiance from its entire body, while the other one was a ridiculously huge sea giant. Now that I mention this, I could probably guess that this was that persistent Lady Storm, the goddess of vengeance who was famous for holding grudges and being petty. Not only did these sea beasts bring about her hostility, they even provided her with a medium for divine power to intervene. The seven-headed dragon's heads were all roaring at the sky. Lady Storm's phantom appeared and disappeared on the largest dragon's head. She was summoning a tempest to create waves. Meanwhile, the sea giant was treading on the waves. Every time its gigantic war hammer struck the surface of the sea, a 10-meter-tall wave would violently crash towards the sea giant. Fighting against them were two gigantic warships. One of the warships was mostly constructed out of steel. Mage towers and engineered cannons were constantly firing cannons and magic. The dragon's skin around the deck was also glowing in a blue radiance. However, it seemed to be suppressing the wind and the waves. The seven dragons watched this scene with bloodshot eyes. They kept roaring, and the wind and waves were forcibly raised by 3 feet. Their frenzied appearance made it seem as if they had met the enemy who killed their parents. Alright, if one were to look into it, the two were actually related. The 9-headed dragon was an evolved version of the 7-headed dragon, and just the skin and heart of the 9-headed dragon on the Borealis seemed to confirm the grudge between the two. There weren't many top-level magical beasts of the same species, so they were more or less related. Judging from how agitated the 7-headed dragon was, it was likely that the 9-headed dragon had either killed its father or its husband. And since the Borealis was participating in the battle here, the other battleship was naturally its brother, the Keelbones warship Mizar. Sigh, it's really not easy to deal with. On the bridge of the Borealis, Marcelet, who was the ship's control hub, had a calm expression on his face. His calm voice echoed across the bridge as he issued battle commands without a care in the world. As the temporary commander of the fleet, Pierre Papin was nervous and didn't dare to be careless. The storm had already persisted for more than 2 hours. From the moment that the enemy 7-headed dragon saw the Borealis, it began summoning storms as if it had gone mad. Winds, waves, and storms attacked at the same time. Dark clouds covered the sky, causing the entire region of the sea to become pitch black where one couldn't even see their own fingers. The dark clouds that filled the sky blocked all vision and magical senses. It was obvious that this was an unnatural phenomenon. We can't hold on any longer. Reduce the power output of the floating engines by 30%. We're heading into the sea. Close all the hatches and dive down. The Borealis chose to enter the sea due to the constant thunder and magical beasts attacked. The broken deck automatically began to mend itself, and the cannons that had been destroyed by lightning were repaired, ready to fire at any moment. The 9-headed dragon's ability to recover underwater helped to balance the scales of the battle. Storms and giant waves constantly battered the hull of the ship. Even though it was daybreak, not a single ray of sunlight could be seen. The crazy turbulence could cause any lookout on the deck to fall into the sea. Even determining the direction of the ship had to be done through a compass. The most dangerous one was still that crazy and petty goddess in the clouds. After finally catching her enemy with great difficulty, Lady Storm discovered that the skin of her beloved pet was actually draped on the enemy's ship. Lady Storm, who was always in a state of hysteria, had completely fallen into madness. She poured out her divine power at all costs, and the sky was filled with thunder and lightning that rained down incessantly. To an ordinary ship, this was a desperate situation that would cause veteran sailors to despair. Giant waves over 10 meters high could overturn a fully loaded ship, but to the Borealis that had already entered the sea, it was just an annoying little wave. When a dragon entered the deep sea, no matter how terrifying the thunder and waves were, it was meaningless. Most of the body of the ship had already entered the sea, and the cannons had been forced to stop firing. Only the mage towers on the deck were still shooting out icy blue ice crystals. In an underwater environment, only a few types of magic could still display their full power. After all, the Borealis had not been designed with underwater combat in mind, and there was no time to change the cannons to specialized underwater ammunition. Reporting, the 6th cabin has entered the water. There should be some damage that needs to be repaired. Reporting, the 3rd cannon on the port side has a mechanical failure and has lost control. It is recommended to directly abandon it. The 2nd mage tower has been struck by lightning. All spellcasters have been evacuated. There are currently no casualties, but it's too passive to only be able to take a beating. A message from the Mizar. Is there an end to that crazy woman in the sky? This is too troublesome. Hurry up and think of a solution. Our first voyage has become our last. That's too unlucky. If it was just 2 top-level sea monsters, the 2 warships would not be a problem. But Lady Storm, who had successfully advanced to become a great divine power, had gone crazy again. No matter how strong the 2 warships were, they were still within the scope of mortals. Yet, the 7-headed dragon didn't hesitate to sacrifice its own body, turning it into a channel for the Queen of Storms to vent her god power, allowing her to unleash her full strength. The endless lightning she summoned forced the 2 battleships to sink. But passively taking a beating like this was not a solution. That top-level sea monster was not to be trifled with. As time passed, the mother of sea monsters and other subordinates would definitely arrive, and the situation would become very difficult. Due to the great improvement of Lady Storm after becoming a great god, the 2 warships of Donglon were showing signs of being unable to withstand the relentless pursuit of this jealous lady. Bad news came one after another at high speed. Marcelet immediately sent out maintenance personnel, and by adjusting the control of the magic power pipelines, they worked hard to speed up the recovery of the damaged parts. The surviving ships were doing their best to save themselves, and the temporary captain of the Demon Muscleman was already sweating profusely. Although he had Marcelet's assistance, it was obviously too much to let an ordinary captain take command of a super warship. The port side was hit by something heavy. It's that damned sea giant. He threw out his warhammer. On the blueprints of the bridge, the part that represented the damage suddenly turned red. The situation was becoming more and more dangerous. Captain Pierre instinctively looked at the passengers on the bridge for help. Even though he was asking for help with his eyes, it was still an indirect request for help. Let us go out and beat them to a pulp. As long as we get rid of that 7-headed dragon that's acting as a medium, the storm will stop. The wavering young knight Madison requested to go to battle. He was a captain of the Aurora Knight Squadron. In order to deal with this situation, the Aurora Borealis had a squadron of 50 Aurora Knights and 50 gold-ranked Aerial Knight. Such a lineup could easily defeat a Dragon Slayer. Even in the face of the Mother of Sea Monsters' wrath and thunder, the young knights still had the confidence of victory. They believed that the pride of the Mist Kingdom, the Aurora Knight, would be able to create a miraculous victory even in the face of the wrath of a god. Young hearts would never fear a challenge. No, they longed for adventure and challenge. What kind of joke is this? Ambush us in this situation? It would be strange if more than half of us didn't die. Are you trying to force me to my death? But how could Pierre dare to reject this young man's request to battle? It wasn't that he didn't believe in the Aurora Knight Squadron's strength. If the 50 Aurora Knights split up and charged, their chances of victory wouldn't be low. But he also knew how rare and precious the Aurora Knight Squadron was. If a few of them were struck to death by the god's wrath, Roland would skin them alive. And with such a tactic, there would definitely be many casualties. From the very start, Pierre's pleading gaze wasn't directed at Madison. Madison was only the aide of this important person who was pretending to be ignorant and watching the commotion. She was the highest leader of the Aurora Knight Squadron in name. Even if that person was still pretending to be ignorant, the desperate Pierre could only summon up his courage and ask for help. "Your Highness, what do you mean?" Only now did the true leader of the squadron wake up from a dream. Her face was filled with astonishment. "You're asking about Renee? Renee doesn't understand naval battles. Why don't we flee? I'm not sure if those two big guys will let us go." Renee spouted nonsense that nobody would believe as she stuck out her tongue and pretended to be cute. Her face, which was so similar to Princess Peach's, had actually learned how to act cute. She was indeed quite dangerous. But right now, Pierre only wanted to spit out a mouthful of blood. It would be best if he spat it on her face. When Roland discovered what was happening at Victoria Harbor, he gave the order for 2 airships to take a detour to Victoria Harbor as reinforcements. If they retreated, they could escape on the airship. If they entered, they could bombard Victoria Harbor. There were plenty of options. As for why they didn't fly overland, it was because the airspace of the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country was a dangerous forbidden zone. Carelessly entering it would easily attract trouble. It was possible to enter the airspace of smaller countries as they pleased, but the Dragon Knight and high-level mages of these 2 countries obviously wouldn't let go of an unknown object before them. This was just like in a certain world where there wasn't even an air force in Africa. But if a fighter airship suddenly entered the airspace of a major country, they would probably just be waiting to collect wreckage. Originally, everything had been going quite smoothly. But the moment they entered this sea region, that goddess of hatred and the sea beasts and the goddess herself came looking for them. Not only that, a certain princess who insisted that Pierre be the captain of the airship had felt that commanding was boring a few days ago, so she forcefully transferred the captain of the Mizar over to Pierre to be the commander of the airship fleet, leaving her to do all the work. And now, she was saying that Pierre didn't understand naval battles at all and didn't want to take responsibility at all. Pierre was angrily shouting in his heart, "Can you be any more ridiculous? Don't be so unreliable like Lord Roland." But on the surface, he could only bitterly pretend to be pitiful and hope that Renee would sympathize with him. And the other person on the bridge was a completely honored guest. After he suddenly came looking for them, Princess Renee's main job for the past few days was to drink tea and chat with him. Pierre didn't even dare to ask this seemingly young passenger, even though he knew that he had the ability to turn everything around. Seeing that the princess still had a naive expression and didn't want to take care of things, Pierre could only brace himself and continue giving orders. However, this honored guest who had come to the airship on his own suddenly spoke up. "Little Angel, it's really outrageous of her to always argue with juniors. It's no wonder that her reputation is getting worse and worse. All of you can be my witnesses. She was the one who attacked the airship that my incarnation was on. I was only acting in reasonable self-defense." Everyone around him hurriedly nodded as they watched this guest attack. After all, his power level was truly a mystery. However, Renee couldn't help but chuckle. She noticed something else. "Angel? Angel? That's such a huge contrast. No wonder she doesn't even use her own name. Even her god's name is a title. Angel." This name meant that she was an angel or an angel-like girl. It was one of the most common names in many human countries, but when used on Lady Storm, who was famous for holding grudges, the incongruity was obvious. "Little brat, you actually dare to mock a true god's true name? Aren't you afraid of divine punishment?" The black-robed young man was smiling, but his expression didn't show any signs of reprimand. The girl in front of him had been constantly testing him over the past few days, and he had also been testing the person behind her eyes, the legendary individual who was in no way inferior to Roland. "Don't be afraid. My big brother Roland will protect me." Even though she was facing a supreme existence in the mortal plane, Renée was as calm as ever. After all, she had experienced so much and was used to dealing with all sorts of existences. "I'm afraid that it won't be just Big Brother Roland who will protect you. Count yourself lucky. I just happened to be looking for Roland to discuss something, and even my incarnation can't directly descend to that place." While talking and laughing, the black-robed young man casually twisted his hand, and a white rose appeared in the void. Then, with a flick of his finger, the flower began to wither, and its petals began to fall one by one, dissipating into the air. Renée, or should I call her Cavendish, was deep in thought. This small action seemed very simple. It seemed like he didn't do anything, but it seemed like he had done a lot. In that instant, the rules of the world were completely distorted, and something was led into the cycle of reincarnation. It was as if the impasse just now was just a joke. In an instant, the storm in the sky had already turned into white clouds and blue sky. The next moment, the sun shone down from the clear sky. The only thing that still proved that the insane lady still existed was the pitiful cries and angry roars that everyone could hear. "Ale? Why? Why are you here? This is a conspiracy against me. Don't kill me." No one knew what Ale had done, but everyone could hear the shock and disbelief in Lady Storm's pitiful cries. The next moment, the storm subsided, and everything returned to normal. The two sea monsters that were left on the battlefield were stunned. When Lady Storm and Angel fled at top speed, these two unlucky ones naturally became abandoned pawns. For a moment, besides the still smiling incarnation of the Grim Reaper, there was only Renée's voice in the bridge. "Everyone has worked hard today. Work harder, and tonight's dragon meat hot pot will be your meal. Oh right, remember to keep all the parts of the dragon plate, they can be used to upgrade and perfect the Borealis. Also, remember to absorb divine substances. Brother Roland will definitely praise me for being diligent and thrifty." According to the rules of the gods, even if it was only an incarnation, the true gods still couldn't attack at will. The more powerful the god, the more it was like this. Lady Storm attacking the ship that Ale was on was simply equivalent to directly attacking him. She was really unlucky. When the true gods of both sides had retreated from the battle, what was left was a battle that belonged to the mortals. At this moment, facing the two powerful fleets, the seven-headed dragon that had already lost the divine power did not even have the strength to escape. The madness just now had already overdrawn all of her life force and physical strength. As for the sea giant, it had already been dragged into the deep sea by the Mizar, and a cruel battle was underway. While everyone was busy, Ale lightly stroked the 3 scrolls on his waist, and various divine lights of different colors flashed on them. Seeing that everything was normal, he heaved a sigh of relief. The materials on these scrolls could not be identified, and the magic waves fluctuated continuously. It was obvious that they were not ordinary items. Lady Storm's conspiracy theory was just overthinking things. If someone wanted to plot against her, they would not have the right to invite Ale. That Ale was on this ship was purely a coincidence. The incarnations of true gods would not easily appear in front of mortals. This time, he had risked the taboo to appear here. Naturally, he had something important to do, and the isolation of that plane made it impossible for him to directly appear in front of Roland through his contract. He could only think of ways to personally come to Roland. The fact that Ale would come to visit him from so far away was enough to prove the importance of this important matter. Mortals had their own troubles, and true gods had their own matters to attend to. This time, they intended to play it big. If everything succeeded, the situation of the entire world would probably be completely reversed, and even Ale would have to come personally. Why don't we play together? If our plan succeeds, you guys will also feel terrible. One of the main gods of the Order faction actually sent an invitation to the main god of the Chaos faction, but Renée Cavendish shook her head. At this point, there was no need to test him. The nature of Chaos determined that she could not participate in this plan. Not interested, we have our own way of playing. Besides, to me, I only hope that Roland is stronger. You actually have brotherly feelings? No, I only hope that when we completely defeat him, I won't feel bored. Aren't you afraid of losing? That's not bad. As long as we have fun, the result is not important from the start. That's why I hate you demons. You fight and kill all day and you're too willful. You don't even have any skills when you rob. This is what Roland said. That's indeed his style. That's why I also hate those hypocrites of the Order faction. They always pretend to be useful. This is what my brother said. That guy really dares to say that. Indeed.